that set up for you real quick.
I can send you one of Jedediah's in Jackson, Chairman Nicholas.
Classic stuff. It's nice.
Gentlemen, you're live on YouTube now.
Oh.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This is a Joint Appropriations Committee conducting a two-day meeting here virtually. We are live, so would you please call the roll?
Yes, good morning, members of the Joint Appropriations Committee. Representative Kinner.
Here in Sheridan.
Representative Larson. Here. Representative Olson.
Excused.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Senator Agar.
Excused.
Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Present.
Senator Kinski.
Present.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
Chairman Bebapt.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We have a quorum. And before we begin, Mr. Co-Chair, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Well, good morning, everybody. I think you've all seen the Greg report that's going to come out. It's, I think the most important thing is we can't get too excited about the good news, because the bad news is still 500 million and $1 billion next biennium on the school side. And we have a lot to learn about the information that we're going to receive and that we'll learn in December and January regarding how much of the cuts are sustainable and ongoing. And so we've got a lot to learn. And this will be the beginning of a very long and interesting 3 months. So we'll put our seatbelts on, and it's good to see you all. And I'll be looking forward to working with you all next month in January and February. So.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Co-Chair. And that's exactly my thoughts this morning, members of the committee and those out there that in Wyoming that are watching this committee meeting, is this is the start of a long road to try to look at the issues facing our state. These times are just unprecedented. There's no question about it. You know, it was a situation, it's bad enough what happened with oil before we got into the COVID. And I'm sure a lot of you probably saw a release by a major coal company here in the last 3 or 4 days that talked about them kind of winding down their production of thermal coal in the Powder River Basin. And whether we like it or not, for at least the foreseeable future, coal is going to really be a situation will continue to decrease in production. And of course, coal has paid billions of dollars to the state of Wyoming in taxes. And those taxes, quite frankly, members of the committee, will evaporate, go away. And how do we replace them? A lot of you are following what's going on with oil. You know, I think we still have a grand total of 3 rigs drilling in Wyoming. Maybe it's 4. All of you are very familiar with oil. If you're not drilling, you're in a decline, and revenues go down, production goes down. So that's not a good sign. And quite frankly, I don't see the drilling rigs picking up anywhere near where they have been nationwide. The other day I looked, and there were about 200 and might have been 85 rigs. And I can remember years ago where we had 245 rigs drilling in Wyoming alone. So we're getting hit with the COVID, we're getting hit with the mineral side of it. You all have been following the debate on fossil fuels. Regardless of your party affiliation, there are those out there that think we should eliminate not having to do with fossil fuels. I'm not one of those, obviously, but if that should happen, what an impact on the great state of Wyoming, which tells us that we really need to continue the efforts we made several years ago to try to diversify our economy and our tax base, which is very difficult to do in these trying times. So with that, I'd like to get started, but members of the committee, any of you have anything you'd like to say? Okay, moving right along. I believe the first person on our agenda is the governor. Governor, are you out there?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Good morning, Governor. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I really want to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today during what is, I hate the word now, unprecedented for Wyoming. And although I've spoken to you and to many others on the committee separately over the past few months, this is the first time that I've been able to address you as a committee in quite some time. The interim, as we all know, has been particularly eventful, and it should be no surprise that the advent and experience of the novel coronavirus has dramatically accelerated Wyoming's concerns about our ability to continue to do all we can and all we can expect from the state government in the coming years. We already knew that we were spending far more than our income could support, and we acknowledged and understood that our savings were not going to last forever. Nevertheless, the economic effects of COVID-19 on top of a price war between the Saudis and the Russians with regard to oil added to concerns, and it certainly added to the problems that we saw in our coal and nuclear industries. Mr. Chairman, you just spoke about that. I want to mention, and I think everybody on this committee knows, these represent the very heart of our mineral sector. But then we saw that the global economy closed and was depressing some of our remaining bright spots like Trona and bentonite. Trona because people weren't driving and breaking windshields. People in Mexico weren't drinking as much beer. Our glass production is an incredible part of what makes our Trona industry work well, and that too has been challenged. From March to May, things look progressively a little bit worse and worse. And since then, there has been a little bit of improvement. But let me try to put that in perspective. A year ago, we had over 30 oil rigs and gas rigs up and running in our state with extensive drilling plans out ahead of us. By July this year, for the first time in our state's history, no rigs were operating. Now, I'm happy to say that as of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission meeting about a week ago, we've bounced back. We now have 4, possibly 5 rigs operating in the state at this time. It's an improvement, but I think all of us know we aren't even close to recovering, and our budget still needs attention. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I am not as certain about the rest of the state. There are those, for instance, who might believe that we have $20 billion in savings, so there should be no need to worry. Those on this committee know well, and anyone who reads the Constitution understands that these are trust funds and they are inviolate for the most part. A third of that is in the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund and cannot be spent on current needs. Rather, these trust funds produce income that helps offset our expenses and defray the taxes of every Wyoming citizen. Raiding their corpus to meet these needs will raise people's taxes. And there are others who might suggest that the legislature has coffee cans stored here and there all over the backyard. And to a degree, I think we can all agree there has been some savings in coffee cans for specific needs. But the budgetary pressures of the last several years, those are becoming much scarcer and scarcer. Truly, we have a lot of work to do, and I appreciate your efforts to help our great state manage this multifaceted crisis. I wanted to address you today because while I know how much we have all spent time analyzing our circumstances, thinking of ways to diversify our economy, working to reduce government spending, and generally both address this bust while setting up the state for a better future, I do not know if Wyoming folks have as good an idea about exactly what Wyoming is facing. Few have followed the state's cash flows as closely as you have and as they have evolved over the past years. And perhaps even fewer appreciate the budget cuts we have had to make, especially in the past few months, but over the last couple of years. Mr. Chairman, you will remember that in 2016 and 17, you were faced with an 8% budget. And those budget cuts that we've effected so far have just been to try to keep us above water And that could mean a real hit on the economic viability of our industries, the livelihoods of our citizens, and the livability of our communities. Far more than just balancing our budget, as you and I are constitutionally constrained to do, these are times to reshape and reformulate government and our state. Wyoming suffered its greatest budget shortfall in history just this year, and just 6 years after her previous record in 2016, 4 years after her previous record in 2016. Responding to diminishing revenues, Wyoming generally funded state government shrank 8%, and then another 10% this year. We have diminished capacity to meet the challenges presented by events like the Goshen County Irrigation District, tunnel collapse last year, or the ability for communities like Glen Rock, Thermopolis, Cheyenne, or Gillette to address crumbling infrastructure, or counties like Goshen, Sublette, or Fremont to upgrade fire and ambulance equipment that breaks down regularly at this point. These were trends that we already understood. The May Consensus Revenue Estimating Group report made clear that what had been a concerning trend was now an outright downdraft. 1/3 of our already diminished expected income was gone. To be sure, we had savings, not the $20 billion that some people thought, but still more than $1 billion in the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account and a few others. But most of those have taps already drilled into them to sustain education funding, the Hathaway Scholarship, school capital construction, and the like. These backstops are significant and speak well of those who put them in place. However, they and their borrowing capacities enacted by the legislature over the past several decades assure that these reserves will be depleted soon, within at least 3 years, if not sooner. We need to address our burn rate. Moreover, as these borrowing facilities are in many places automatic, it will require the legislature to stop action to stop the bleeding. It was with a decidedly dour Meg Craig outlook in mind that this administration set forth to recalibrate our budget, regulate our expenditures, and begin to address a new and very pessimistic set of circumstances. We froze hiring. We implemented 10% cuts, not across the board, but every agency we asked to cut by 10%. Some we didn't quite go that far, some we didn't, but there were reasons we did that. And we asked agencies to consider further cuts approaching 10%. Those will be coming to you over the next couple of months. And we asked them to be thinking about further cuts that may happen even beyond that. You may remember that I said early on that we had about 1/3 of our income gone. We would need to reduce our expenditures by at least 30% just to keep even. If we keep up that pace, the state of Wyoming will have made cuts approaching 40% of general fund spending in 4 years and more than 50% in the last decade or so. These cuts will hurt. They mean reduced ability to get and file permits, diminished services for mental health, substance abuse, and senior services. It means bridges, and we have an example of that, no longer able to support a full pod of cows, requiring now instead of 1 truck, 2 trucks, where a few years ago it would have saved shipping costs. It means diminished services to our smallest towns, less timely filing of orders for things like liquor. It means less aggressive water development, a diminished ability to expand broadband, to fight federal overreach, law enforcement, and so on. Importantly, many of these services are supplied by contracts with for-profit and nonprofit companies in towns like yours. Fewer folks will have disposable income to spend on Main Street and in our restaurants and bars. And it means our rest areas close to existing towns will remain closed. That is still a relevant scenario and very much on my mind. With time, We can now see the Meg Craig report describe the biggest trough in economic activity, as well as the most unclear expectations for what COVID might do to our economy. The May report represented the worst financial crisis perhaps our state has ever faced. To be sure, our state has had smaller budgets in the past, but more people have come to rely on our services, and those services have become more expensive with time. But you know this all very well, and you know that our savings will not tide us over for very long, especially considering the various automatic backstop mechanisms I described. There are many holes in our savings. I said in my budget message last November that a storm was bearing down on Wyoming. There was, and there is, an all-out assault on the very industries that have made Wyoming strong. Mr. Chairman, you spoke about the assault on the fossil fuel industry, but you can look to agriculture and you can look elsewhere to see that Wyoming is under constant attack. As Wyoming citizens, we have all benefited from the extraordinary wealth that has been generated from the development and exploitation of our minerals. Not only do these industries support us every day, but they have funded the exceptional trust funds that defray every Wyoming citizen's tax burden. Each of us benefits directly from the royalty payments, ad valorem taxes, property taxes, and severance taxes that the mineral industry disproportionately pays. Wyoming citizens only pay for about a third of the government services they receive. Minerals cover most of the rest. Virtually all companies engaged in mining coal in Wyoming has faced financial duress, underscored most recently by Arch Minerals' announcement of a planned divestiture of thermal coal. That is and has been Wyoming's bread and butter. These are companies that have built schools, funded education, and tided us over just a few years ago in 2008 when our investments were unable to carry the freight. COVID-19 is a black swan event. No one understood the threat it posed to the global economy a year ago. Whether one considers COVID a hoax or the wrath of God visited on mankind, the fact is that the novel coronavirus has devastated the global economy. All states have experienced an economic slowdown. Wyoming never implemented a stay-at-home or shelter-in-place order. Rather, we have relied on our citizens' common sense, for better or for worse. Our experience was pretty good, all things considered. We were one of the 3 states, for example, to hold a state fair because our people understood the challenge and responded. Despite the fact Wyoming is one of the least restricted states, and our experience has been until recently relatively better than our peers, our fewer than 580,000 people cannot make up for the demand of an entire country traveling and opened up. A muted national and global economy will continue to challenge our state's fundamental industries and exacerbate the structural deficits that we have talked about and seen coming for more than a decade. How much, what kind of, and what we expect from, and how we fund government, how we spend precious resources, and how we run the state are all questions that will underlie almost all of our budget discussions this session and next year, because this is a problem for our state, for our future, and not just for this year. This problem is especially acute when it comes to education spending, where our constitutional obligations have been established and where the legislature has also established automatic measures to protect against revenue shortfalls. It is a bit like the scene in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where the tank is careening towards a cliff and no one can stop it. Our automatic guarantees for funding education do not provide for remedy until there are inadequate funds available. Or, to use the metaphor, our tank has gone off the cliff. This ticking time bomb cannot be easily diffused, and yet that is what we will need to do in the coming years. The storm I forecasted in my budget last November arrived much sooner than anticipated, and it has been much more devastating than we imagined. But the storm was not caused by COVID-19, only amplified. Even when the pandemic no longer occupies the central role that it does today, the issues we face last fall will remain. The things we need to do must still be done. And already many painful choices have been made. The executive branch froze hiring and halted large contracts back in April. There were some exceptions, I will admit. Then I worked with state agencies and slashed spending by nearly 10% in July. These cuts eliminated a number of many important services and investments. Nothing is easy about these choices. Right here in Cheyenne, one program to support elderly citizens is now closing its doors. Across Wyoming, private healthcare providers in every community are getting less money to serve Medicaid patients, as those rates were cut as well. School boards, I have to say, have responded in many ways to my call for voluntary reductions and are looking at layoffs. Community colleges are doing the same. But these have eroded our economy a bit further. That is evidenced by the 165 positions cut from the Department of Corrections. Each of those positions being cut means an impact of around $160,000 to the GDP of Torrington, Rawlins, or Lusk. The economy and our vulnerable citizens suffer when we reduce general fund spending by $11 million for Medicaid, which means that all told, doctors, hospitals, and other providers will see $22 million less next year. That's again taking money out of Wyoming communities and economies, with an impact felt most acutely by those with disabilities and other situations requiring Medicaid assistance. Now, some might cynically suggest that cuts were chosen for political impact. That's not the case. The choices we made were made to minimize impact. The fact of the matter is there just aren't any easy choices to make anymore. In fact, some of the next choices will require the legislature consider repealing statutes that we no longer have the ability to prosecute and where mandated programs cannot be funded. I have asked state agencies to prepare for even deeper spending reductions. Some of those cuts can be offset by spending from savings and may be offset if revenue forecasts improve again in January. Yet that would only be temporary. And I am not interested in building a budget that just tries to get us to next year. Wyoming, if she wants to remain competitive and productive in the great state she is, must live within her means and structure herself for economic opportunity. I do not need to caution you in this room about what inaction means. We fought hard for primacy in our environmental regulations. We are fighting for respect for our right to manage our own wildlife within our borders. We are anxious to build a workforce that will bring vitality and commerce to our communities. And we are eager to develop our resources, including water, in a way which will benefit our children and keep them here. Doing nothing will condemn us to a slow, painful decline, even as we hope for that one more boom Wyoming always seems to hope for. Together, however, I believe we can find a solid, fiscally responsible, and conservative state government, one that protects our opportunity and our liberty, encourages enterprise, and paves the way for a brighter future. This new CREG shows some relief for both general fund programs and education. That's nice, as I said before, but it's not complete. There is still a shortfall of hundreds of millions of dollars for school funding. It is not some remote possibility in the distant future. It is right here in front of us. It will grow wider and larger in the coming years if we do nothing. And if we do nothing at this pace, by the end of this biennium, Wyoming will have gone through reserves of $1 billion in 5 years, largely to pay for K-12 education, while costs have exceeded revenues. What will we do when we're broke? There may be some opportunity to consider unparalleled and cataclysmic changes, such as closing our maximum security prison in Rawlins or defunding water development. What about community colleges at the University of Wyoming? Should we eliminate the Children's Health Insurance Program? Do we cease services for agriculture, veterans, and elder towns and cities? Clearly, we should focus on those programs that are constitutionally mandated. Maybe we want to also consider health and safety as being important. But after that, what should we eliminate? I grew up in this state and have to say, I never remember a time when we didn't look to our future and work to make this great state better for our kids, not just for ourselves. I have a fundamental belief that we must live within our means. Defining those means are the heart of our discussions this morning, because I believe that already we have made cuts that will prove costly to us all in the long run and prevent Wyoming from emerging with strength when COVID ends. This is a pressing discussion, but I also want to make sure that you're up to date on some other topics. The spending on CARES Act's $1.25 billion that you helped direct during the special session has gone pretty well. A quarter of that money is gone to Wyoming businesses through programs we developed together. Another program for agricultural producers will launch within days, as will further support for the economy with relief for businesses. The next largest allocation went to local governments in accordance with statute and federal guidance, so municipalities and counties can respond to the crisis. The third largest allocation was for education, to keep our students and teachers safe as schools, colleges, and universities all reopened this fall. We supplemented significant dollars when we went to the healthcare system as well, funding a robust testing and contact tracing system, including providing free at-home COVID-19 tests to any Wyoming resident. Other areas of note include Connect Wyoming's broadband program that is bringing faster internet speeds to many underserved and unserved communities so they can have access to telehealth, teleeducation, and remote working opportunities. We also gave employers a rate holiday on workers' compensation, and we are keeping the unemployment trust fund stable, which in turn helps workers and businesses. As the year winds down, I continue to wait to see if Congress will extend the deadline for CARES programs. I speak almost weekly with our delegation to understand exactly what the prospects for that would be. I believe if Congress can get that, the changes, the much needed changes they're discussing passed, it will help Wyoming. But if there is no extension, our main plan is to beef up our contact tracing and testing to the end of the year, provide another round of business relief, help ensure local communities get as much money allocated to them as possible, and fortify the unemployment programs and do another investment in equipment for schools to be as safe as possible. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for these extended remarks and your patience, members of the committee. I wanted to get through most of those topics because I think you know far better than anyone just exactly how challenging these circumstances are for Wyoming. But I think you share the belief that I do, that Wyoming is a remarkable place filled with remarkable people who know how to face adversity, and we will do so successfully. So I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Governor, for those opening comments. We really appreciate it. Boy, it's an interesting situation like we talked about. Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee, Governor, do you have a chance for answer some questions? Would you have time?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Governor. Okay, members of the committee, anybody have any questions? Starting with Mr. Co-Chair. Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Governor, thank you for your words. I was wondering if you had visited with the coal companies after the announcement that was made that one of them was moving away from thermal coal. And are we just going to see a shift? You know, will that production get shifted to other mines? Do you think? Do you have any sense of whether there'll be, you know, further immediate declines in coal production and coal sales, or will some of that get picked up? Have you had a chance to visit with other coal companies?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Summers. Thank you for that question. I have spoken with both Arch and Peabody. We, as you know, were very interested to see if their joint venture could prevail because we felt that was a way to bring some certainty to the coal markets in Campbell County. There is some indication, although we see a continuing diminished demand for coal, but there is some indication that there will be perhaps a bit of shifting. One of the challenges we see is that the mine, many of the mines there are running into coal that is more expensive to mine now because it's either deeper, has more overburden, or the logistics are just tough. I have spoken with Arch, and they were the ones that announced they were going to move away from thermal coal to metallurgical coal. They have told us that they intend to do that, but they intend to do that in a way that will continue to provide jobs to the best of their ability. We have hoped, and I think you know this, Representative, that we've been very active in trying to make sure that people don't write off coal prematurely, and we will continue those efforts. But so far, we've seen a continued decline in demand.
Okay, thank you for that, Governor. Any other questions, members of the committee?
Yeah, and let me know.
Any other
if I
questions?
Turn your water on.
Go ahead, Senator Garou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Governor, and thanks for being here. I just wanted to kind of get a sense from you on the cuts you've made so far. You know, we've been going. I know all of us have been kind of poring over them and looking at different departments, and you know, I really appreciate the fact that a lot of the departments seem to have really taken it to heart and taken it very seriously. I just want to know if you could just kind of expand a little bit on what your experience has been as you've gone through this. What do you think are some of the real highlights of it, as far as which groups do you think are really doing it right? And then also some of the challenges you've had and where we could help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Garou. Thank you for that question. The approach we took was to reach out to each of the agencies and to ask them to do their best job of making those cuts, understanding that they would have they were closest to the ground, they'd have a better understanding of what the chances for reductions might be. I will say that by and large, every agency in that first round of 10% cuts really did look carefully at what they could do. When they choices came to this office, we've sort of emphasized health and safety, things that will keep our businesses running, and that's the reason why you see a few of the agencies that didn't take as steep a cut. You know, children's services, things like that. We tried to be a little kinder to. In this next round, there have been some real challenges for agencies. One that comes to mind is the Secretary of State's office, where business registrations must occur within a certain period of time. And he's indicated to me that if they take the full 10% in the second round, that will significantly compromise their ability to do that. So in this second round, and I think that Craig now tells us that maybe we don't have to be as draconian. We don't have to go quite as deep in every agency, because maybe things are hopefully a little better. Although I will say that with the spike in COVID cases, we saw oil down sharply this morning. But nonetheless, what I think you will see as the agencies come to you is a description of exactly the things they will no longer be able to do. And I think the opportunity for them to express that to you and your ability to discuss that, Senator, are very important to the people of Wyoming, because, as I say, we'll have to make these reductions at some point or another, and I think it's very important we all be informed about that.
If I can follow up, Mr. Co-Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Governor, also wanted to just kind of chat a little bit about opportunities. And one of the concerns I had too is looking at it, there are some areas where, we have had some bright spots in it, whether it be in recreational tourism this summer. And also, I think that a lot of credit should go to the Business Council for some of the work they've done. I'm concerned about, cutting budgets where actually we might be able to help diversify and not wanting to, like you say, put ourselves on a track of a slow bleed where we actually could invest and move forward. What are your thoughts about that? And are there other areas that you can see?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, Senator Rowe. You're right. The pivot that this administration tried to do early on, knowing that Wyoming was safe, knowing that it was open, and knowing it was a great recreation state, was to try to do what we could to promote recreation coming to the state. For the most part, I believe that worked well. I know in my community, some of the sporting goods stores have never seen years like they did this year. Certainly in your community, we were up reportedly somewhere between 120 and 160%, depending on who you talk to, if they were really stuck in traffic or not. But I think generally throughout the state, we saw increased levels of visitors coming to Wyoming. Unhappily, most of them came in campers. So we didn't see in lodgings quite as much activity as we might have hoped, and hopefully that changes over the years to come. I will continue to push for our ability to market Wyoming as a safe and wonderful place to recreate. A lot of people will talk about recreation as having low-income jobs, et cetera. I recognize that, but at the same time, it has been low-hanging fruit, and we have been very successful. I think the Business Council, to your point, has also done a terrific job, both with CARES Act, but also with soliciting new businesses coming into Wyoming. We have one in Evanston that is moved in. That's a manufacturing concern that we're very excited about, and that we're also seeking actively a couple of other new industries to show up in Wyoming. They liked our tax structure. They like the fact that we're open for business, and they like the fact that people in Wyoming have a common sense. Senator, I think the other thing that possibly we can do, and I've made this comment to other senators on the committee, is that with states and local governments, we need to rethink a little bit how we apply those resources. We will have fewer resources that we can send to counties and local governments. So we need to make sure that there's a process that allows us to do that in a much more targeted way. And not just to meet the emergencies that might arise when Glen Rock's sewer system collapses, or Thermopolis's water system falls apart, but in ways that allow us to think about building our communities going forward. So I think your point is well taken.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Co-Chair, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So first of all, Governor Gordon, I just, on behalf of the Joint Appropriations Committee, we would like to thank you. Thank you for taking the bull by the horns. As soon as this situation arose, you took immediate action. And as a result of those actions and what you did, we're now $400 million closer to a solution than we would have been had you not acted. And so you so you took that upon yourself, and you put the agencies through a lot of hard licks. And we know it's not an easy thing to do, but thank you for doing that. And with regards to going forward, as the Joint Appropriations Committee begins to work through your reductions, we look forward to hearing from you on number one, reductions that you made that maybe on hindsight, you're thinking, well, maybe that was too much or too less on a particular agency. Or if you have particular programs that you believe, as you have been evaluating this over the course of 4 or 5 months, you think that we should take particular close attention to, please keep our lines of communication open so that we can work together with you on that. And if we know, as you know, recently, last week, there was a report that came out from the Tax Association that said the state of Wyoming is the lowest taxed state overall in the United States. That's a wonderful thing. But we know that that can't happen forever, and that some revenue enhancements of some sorts may be required one way or the other. With regard to that, we would look forward to your ideas and concepts on making sure that the services that we provide, that the people of Wyoming pay as they go, and they pay their fair share. So we welcome your comments and feedbacks on where we can look to revenue sources that are basically items that are services that we receive that in reality, other than the fact that we've been extremely wealthy over the past numerous decades, that people should pay their fair share, because that's the Wyoming way, and that's the way we want to do it. With regards to other sources, for example, we want to know your ideas on a gas tax. The whole thing about a gas tax revenue is that 3/4 of it is paid by out-of-state folks. And so as we move forward in analyzing if and when there are revenue enhancements, we'd like your feedback, your comments. And as we present ideas, proposals to the Wyoming public, it will be our responsibility and your responsibility to help explain and kind of lead the road, if you will, lead the way on educating folks so that we can make sound decisions and we don't push this tank off the cliff and land someplace where we don't want to be. But once again, thank you very much for your service and for taking on the responsibility to get this on the road. Thank you.
Okay, we got a couple of hands up. I would echo what the co-chairman said, Governor. Senator Hicks, go ahead.
Yeah, Governor, again, thank you for the first round and your efforts on this. Governor, a concern I have, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is with the uptick of the October CREG, I think we all realize the infusion of trillions of dollars of federal debt into the economy at both the federal level, the state level, the local level, and the personal level. While we've seen an uptick in the October CREG, my concern is a lot of this is fueled with federal debt. It's a balance that may not be sustainable, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on that as far as how we should budget moving forward within the state of Wyoming, knowing that this uptick in the economy to a great deal is fueled by federal debt.
Good, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Hicks. Before I get to your question, Senator, let me say thank you very much for your kind words, both you co-chairs. I want to echo one of the concerns that we're trying to manage here is not cutting too far so that we really don't position ourselves well for a recovery. And I also want to say how much I appreciate the morale of the people, the workforce of Wyoming. These have been difficult times, and they've kind of stood in there. But to your question, Senator Hicks, I know you and I have talked about the debt that this country takes on. It doesn't seem, if it's Republican or Democrat, to matter. We just keep on taking more debt on and more debt, which is really frustrating when you think about the interest that is going to be put on that national debt. It now takes the ability of the Federal Reserve and diminishes it to just another wing of government. And so the independence, quote unquote, of the Federal Reserve and its ability to affect the economy going forward, I think is compromised. I share with you the concern that come the 31st or some short time after that, when Congress finally realizes you just can't give money out on a regular basis, the results will be very difficult for our national economy and probably for Wyoming as well. I've been, as you know, an advocate for people taking personal responsibility for their finances, because money falling out of the trees, the universal income aspect of this is just nonsense. And to my thinking, we have got to get our house in order. And if we want to attract new businesses to the state, if we want to keep our existing businesses here in the state, the best way to do that is to have a fiscally ordered house, one that shows that our fiscal situation is going to be predictable and stable, that we are not sticking our head in the sand, and that we are making the difficult choices that we need to. So I stand ready to work with all of you, because I think we share that belief that Wyoming's best days are going to be when we aren't continually worrying about when the next bust or the next boom, but when we have a predictable and stable way forward.
Representative Walters, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Governor. My question is in regards to the Federal CARES Act. Based on our accounting on the legislative side, approximately half of it has actually gone out the door in roughly 6 months or a little over. And with 2 months remaining, what is your plan to make sure that that money gets out the door? I recognize that you have it allocated and have great ideas, and I certainly applaud all of those ideas. It just seems that from the allocation phase to the out the door phase has taken significant time, and with time not being on our side, what is your plan to get it out the door faster? Because in my opinion, it would be a crying shame to see any of it sent back to Washington, D.C. And I would rather risk the thought of an audit from the feds and even possibly a slight repayment if we had to. That would be a better risk to take than sending any of it back to DC because it goes unspent by the 31st. Thank you, Governor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Walters, and but believe me, I appreciate your sense of urgency on this. We share it. I think you probably know this, Representative Walters, but you know, there's an allocation, there's what's gone out the door and is registered in the auditor's office, and then there's sort of the grand total that's there. And as you mentioned, we've got the allocation for local governments, for hospitals, et cetera. Those are done. The new programs for business come online, and then we continue to fund for schools and for medical care. Part of the problem with the number that you have seen, which is around what 625 million or so, is that those represent receipts that we have been able to pay on. So there are contracts, forward contracts, that will have receipts coming to us, particularly in the case of the health department and others. So in other words, these are services that we're getting now, but they will be billed to us. Local communities and hospitals, we are processing those receipts as they come in. We need to have a receipt, and then we send the money out. So I think you're going to see a pretty substantial uptick to that. Erica will talk to you a little bit later on my staff today about precisely what that means. So off the top of my head, I'm going to say that we still are, I would say, probably 200 million ahead of the 625 that you see that it's actually committed or ready to go out the door. As I mentioned before, the plans that we have are really on two tracks. One, if Congress does something that allows us to use CARES funding to make up revenues, which is what was in that Senate bill, and requires that a third of that money has to go to local governments, we are positioned to be able to do that. If Congress does not meet those needs, as I think I've mentioned before, we're going to put more into small businesses. Wyoming has put proportionally more of CARES funding into our small businesses than any other state. We'll continue to do that. We look to be able to fund local governments to a greater degree, and that will also be helpful and set them up for the coming year. And then we look to, and there may be a couple of places where, to your point, we want to push the envelope to some degree, and so I have no doubts that all of our money will be out the door. If not by December 20th, then shortly thereafter. We clearly have this locked and loaded and ready to go.
Okay, Reverend Schwartz.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Reverend Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman, and thank you, Governor, for joining us this morning. It's good to see you. So I'd like to follow up on Co-Chairman Nicholas's comments a little bit regarding revenues. There seems to be a school of thought, I don't agree with it, that we can't really consider augmenting our revenue streams until we spend down all our savings, in particular the LISRA. I'm just curious your opinion on that school of thought.
Go ahead, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Summers. I don't know as that is a particularly fiscally prudent approach, just in terms of Wyoming's tradition. Wyoming has understood that there are times when you have more income and times when you don't. And so we have, and I think I want to compliment the legislature and particularly the leadership over the last several years in understanding that and being able to set aside monies for these rainy days. Spending it down without a good plan on how you're going to continue government after that doesn't make it. But my particular concern with the way we as a state generally think about our savings is that, you know, we have I think it's about 1.4 off the top of my head $billion now in the rainy day account, the legislative stabilization reserve account. And a great deal of that is already committed to funding education, to funding school construction, to backstop the Hathaway program. And you all know that was the reason I mentioned this. So when we say there's 1.4 billion out there, we really don't have a free 1.4 billion. We have considerably less than that and a burn rate on that just indicates it's all going to go away in the next couple of years. And as I say, we have no way of addressing the Common School Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, nor should we. Nor should we, think about the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund as a savings account, because they are not. So I believe, Representative, that it is going to be critical for the Joint Appropriations Committee and for this legislature to come to terms with what it means to have a proper savings and have a proper way forward.
Yeah, Governor, I've got a couple of questions for you as well. And the first one, I guess, would be that you and I are both businessmen, have had careers in business, and understand the ups and downs of our Wyoming economy. And, we always hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And And of course, a lot of us, years ago when the coal industry was under attack, didn't realize or believe, including me, that it would be so devastating. I just didn't think that the climate warming and all that would take such hold and we would see what we're seeing. And now as we look to the future again, and with oil, and of course elections have consequences, and there's a movement out there that we talk about fracking, whether they're going to stop it or not, but particularly on our federal lands, that there will be no future leases. And some of these other ideas going on, and we mentioned fossil fuels. And so if you look at the state, 20 years ago, our general fund budget was around 1 billion. It escalated in the early 2000s to about 3.6 billion. We brought it down. It's under 3 billion now. LISRA was low. It's about 1.5 billion, like you said. So how do we plan, working together with the executive branch for these unknowns as we move forward? What is a comfortable level of spending for the state in terms of our general fund and education, which we haven't really talked about? What is a comfortable level of what we should have in savings? Because I think the worst thing we can do is spend all our LISRA down to zero, and then we truly are at the edge of the cliff. And yet, when you talk to the average citizens in Wyoming, they really don't think we have a problem. And we really do. It's serious as the dickens. So as the governor working with the legislature, how do we cope with these issues and plan for the future? We're doing the right thing so far, but I always believe you got to look farther out than next week, next year, next 2 years. You got to look out 3 or 4 years. So what we can do working together to move forward, and that's a pretty big question, but I know you've given a lot of thought. What would your ideas be as we move forward together?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. You couldn't be more right. As businessmen, we know that you can't just sort of plan for how do I make it to next year. You really have to think about what am I going to do the year after and the year after. And in this particular case, this is a challenge for Wyoming generally, because if we cannot find a sustainable level of government that makes sense and that we can afford under the circumstances that we see coming, no one is going to move here. Nobody's going to want to move their business here. There are parasites that would love to come to Wyoming and just suck us dry and not participate in our economy. And those are all concerns that I have. My hope is, Mr. Chairman, that what we can do is through the course of our conversations, and you will have agency directors that will outline exactly the choices that that further reductions will mean. And I think that's a general conversation. I'm not ducking the leadership role, but I do believe the legislature plays a very important. You all were elected to represent your constituents. And I think we need to work together to find what that acceptable level of government is. And when it comes to things like roads, I know that's one thing that we have had to cut back a bit on. I've had letters from constituents that have said, gravel, nothing wrong with gravel roads. But I also know as a cattleman myself that having to have 2 trucks when I could have had 1 because a bridge isn't sound anymore is a problem. And so I think we will have to work together to find what that appropriate level is and to be able to say, these are the things, and you know this very much because you and I have talked about it, Mr. Chairman, that there are many things that where the state funds 1/3 and the federal government funds 2/3. So if we cut the 1/3, we actually cut a lot more out of the services that people in Wyoming get. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. It's a big question and a lot of moving parts. A very, very difficult one to answer. But anybody else? It's about 9 o'clock now, Governor, and I know that you've got a heavy schedule. Anybody else have any quick questions for our governor? Governor, on a point of personal privilege and true leadership, when things are going well, it's easy to lead. When things are difficult, that's when true leadership comes out. And And having worked with you the last couple of years in your role as governor, and before that in your role as treasurer, at least from a point of personal privilege, I truly have enjoyed working with you. You know, your love for the state of Wyoming is no different or any greater than all of us on this committee and those that choose to serve our state. So thank you for that. And it's been a real pleasure. It's, you know, it's going to get tougher, I think, as we move forward. I'll be watching in the wings as you and the Joint Appropriations Committee move forward to take care of this great state. And so I just want to thank you from my personal perspective. Of enjoyed working with you. We've not always agreed, but at the end of the day, we really wanted what was best for Wyoming, and we got there. So, Governor, thank you for that from me personally, and good luck. And we'll be working with you. You know, we'll be together a little bit later this fall, I think, in the first part of December as we look at supplemental budgets. So we look forward to that. And during the interim, going back to what Co-Chairman Nicholas said, truly we want to be together in this and working with you personally as members of the JAC, as a co-chairman of it, whatever it takes to move us through these difficult times. So, Governor, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to work with all of you.
Okay, thank you, Governor. And we're going to move on. Don, did we leave something out early on about going over the 3 previous meetings that you were going to make some comments on?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, there was a note on my agenda that said that, so we'll forego that. Okay, let's talk about Craig. Go ahead, Don.
Yes, good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. I come before you today wearing the hat of co-chair of Craig rather than in my traditional position of LSO, Budget and Fiscal Administrator. Kevin Hibbard, who is also the co-chair of Craig from the executive branch side, has joined us and is available for any questions the committee may have as well. Recall that the consensus revenue process is just that. It's a 9-member consensus process, each bringing their own special insights and expertise. The report is better because of their individual and collective contributions. And this particular fall, I want to recognize the extraordinary efforts of the Wyoming State Geological Survey, which has done a fair bit of enhanced analysis on shut-in wells, both natural gas as well as oil. And they have also contributed significantly to help us to identify the best estimate possible for the natural gas and oil incentive that was adopted in the 2020 budget session. As noted in the May 2020 report, the theme at that time was humility. We had one data point and an uncertain future. Time has revealed that at least for the first 5 months since the May Craig, we were potentially too pessimistic over the summer. In the spirit of the World Series, Yogi Berra said, "It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future." I'll move through my presentation with a short introduction, and then we'll get right to the summary of the dollar impacts. Then I'll proceed through each of the Craig revenue streams. And then I will move to the high and low forecasts as well as long-term comment. And then finally, I will touch base briefly on the profile. I'm happy to take questions as the chair determines, either as we proceed or at the end.
I think when we go through it, Don, if someone has a question while we're there, let's go ahead and ask it. Go ahead, Don.
Great. I'm speaking on page 1 of the report under the introduction. Nearly all state revenue streams forecast by Craig in May 2020 exceeded or met expectations. There are just a handful that fell short. Trona might be an example of that. Penalties and interest might be another example. But by and large, when you look at sales tax, oil, coal, natural gas, they met or exceeded the Craig revenue forecast. The downturn in Wyoming's economy, however, and associated revenue collections are historic, especially by the top 2 industries for Wyoming, mining and tourism. The depths of the downturn, however, to date have not been quite as severe as contemplated in May 2020. A large portion of that is the federal government's financial assistance in the form of direct payments, higher unemployment benefits, forgivable loans to businesses, new and expanded aid programs to the public and private sector. We also live in a juxtaposition of data. On the one hand, Wyoming's unemployment rate peaked at 9.6%. It's now fallen to 6.1%. That's substantial and significant. At the same time, the Bureau of Economic Analysis notes that calendar year 2020 Q2 personal income increased by 10% in the depths of a recession. We still have concerns that remain unaddressed and uncertainty. The October Craig forecast incorporates higher than anticipated tax revenue that we know has occurred in the past 4 months. And we've also incorporated that into our forward-looking projections. However, there are significant areas of uncertainty that remain. For example, future federal responses are unknown. Future election results and the policies associated with those are unknown. I spoke with my colleagues of a majority of the states, as well as one of the top private forecasters that many states use for their Craig forecasting. Those private forecasters have the ability, unlike Wyoming and Craig, to forecast policy as well. And that top forecaster indicated that, this was in September, indicated that Congress would pass additional stimulus prior to the November election. Well, we have a few days for that prediction to come true. They projected a Democratic change of administration and that no additional stimulus would occur in the first half of calendar year 2021, but rather increased tax package would be adopted in the first half of 2021. Craig doesn't involve itself in any of those types of projections. We don't do land policy. We don't contemplate in the report before you an additional $1 billion or $1 trillion, $2 trillion, or even $4 trillion of additional stimulus. All of those would have a significant impact, and I would stress that Wyoming's historically volatile revenue could be in store for even more or greater revenue. Now I'll move a little bit backwards to the cover memo page I, or Romanet 1, and briefly touch on the bottom line impacts. In May, I came before you, and the net result was an $877 million budget gap for the general fund and budget reserve. That has been reduced to $451 million on the revenue side. That is comprised of $205 million of FY20 activities, known revenues, transfers, and a substantial amount of reversions. And then another $219 million of forecast revenue, which has not occurred yet, but we anticipate it will over the next 2 years. In addition, the governor has reduced at least $339 million, including the legislative and judicial branches, as well as $80 million in major maintenance, a total of 339, I'll round that to $340 million. In addition, the state agencies provided about $67 million in reversions. This was largely, not entirely, but largely a result of the step 1 budget reductions, such as the vacancy freeze and the review of large contracts that the governors and the executive branch have implemented in the spring of 2020. So if you add those reversions plus the planned and implemented budget reductions, you get about $400 or $400 million in total reductions and about $365 million in revenue improvements. On the far right-hand side, that brings us to a $112 million budget gap, meaning a change from 877 in May to just 112 million as a result of this report. Importantly,
let's break in there for a second. So substantial difference in numbers, and talk about one time or monies that, you know, you mentioned major maintenance and some construction activities. Out of that, how much would you consider to be ongoing? So to get a true reflection of what would be, if you just took out all the one time, if there's one time in there in the construction, major maintenance, some of those what have we really done in terms of reductions, in terms of actual government expenditures that would be what I would consider ongoing?
Sure. On both the revenue side as well as the expenditure side, there are a number of one-time. So first on the revenue side, the FY 2020 revenue that exceeded expectations is likely to be one time, and that's half of the revenue increases, 205 of the roughly $425 million. So about half of the revenue is likely not to continue to sustain itself in 21, 22, 23, 24, and beyond. On the expenditure side, the reversions are likely to be largely one time, or at least incorporated in the budget reductions. And then the $80 million for major maintenance. I don't know if you want to consider a permanent reduction, and a big part of that is the reduction of the percentage from 2% to 1.75%. That could be in perpetuity. It could be one time. So it's hard for me to determine whether or not that's a one-time cut or a sustainable cut. It could be either. And then when you look at the agency budget reductions to date, the vast majority of those are ongoing. There are a few one-time areas. Kevin may have a better sense of that, but I would say it's probably in the $20 to $40 million range that is truly one time. And I'll pause there, and if Kevin wishes to opine differently, I would defer to him.
Mr. Chairman, Kevin Hibbard. Actually, we are working on that report this morning, and hopefully we'll have the details to you this afternoon. But I agree with Mr. Richards that of the $254 million that we cut in the general fund, that's vastly ongoing. And I also agree with Mr. Richards on there's a choice on major maintenance, whether we consider that one time or ongoing. But we have incorporated in the step 2 a reduction from the 2% threshold to the 1.5% threshold. And then we'll have a clawback in the supplemental to supplant that with SIPA and similar nature to the bill that we worked with the legislature, the Joint Appropriations Committee last summer.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is we just got to be so careful of having what we, a little bit rosier projection when it's really one time, and we just can't bank on that down the road. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it looks like there's 300 to 350 million of that would be considered one time. Don, would that be a fair assessment?
I would say so on the spending side, yes.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Don, could you elaborate a little bit more on the revenue side on what revenues are ongoing, what revenues are projected as one time? Thank you.
Sure. So Representative Summers, Mr. Chairman, the FY 2020 revenues exceeded expectations, and they provided a real boost. It's actual cash in on hand. It is not a projection. We're not going to miss that. And that amounted to $205 million of our $425 million change on the revenue side. So the majority, or about half of the revenue on the general fund, is from the last biennium. And we don't continue at that level going forward in future years.
So then the question is, that other 205 million, are you saying it would be there or would not be there?
Mr. Chairman, I am saying that our increase to the 21-22, meaning our increase to the forecast, which is $225 million, that is ongoing.
Okay, anything else, committee? Continue.
Importantly, the $112 million shortfall, and that's after the governor's reductions, after the Craig estimates, after all of the actual cash that was earned in FY 2020. It appears on page 1 of the profile, line 17. Keep in mind that does not include the statutory reserve amount. So historically, your predecessors have included a 5% general fund guarantee, a cash balance to react to the volatile revenues that the state receives. That amount is $113 million. So if you use the prior accounting approach of your predecessors, the real budget gap is $225 million. The 112 actual negative deficit plus some amount of statutory reserve amount, adding up to a total of 225 million. The reason I stress that is in this volatile environment, if our projections as to oil, and we can see the markets are not performing well today, are too optimistic now, that source of money provides the ballast. If our error on coal, for example, or sales and use taxes with the lack of additional federal stimulus is too optimistic, your predecessors have budgeted a 5%, and it's required actually for the governor to include a 5% statutory reserve amount for that cash balance. Second issue, this does not include the 1% severance tax. Again, this does not include the 1% severance tax. The legislature has used that revenue source for the past 4 years, but so far the legislature has not elected to use that revenue source in the 21-22 biennium. With that, I'll move.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Don, perhaps you could remind us on the 1% severance, how, part of that goes into the LISRA and part of it would flow. Could you just kind of go over those dates and the amount of money that's held there? So I think as much for the audience listening as for those of us that are kind of in the mix, but could you go over that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This committee included a provision in the 2021-2022 budget that gave you an opportunity, at least at the time, they were thinking it was an opportunity to revisit that distribution. 50% of fiscal year 21's amount would go to the LSRA and 50% would go to the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund corpus, an inviolate corpus. If the legislature does not act prior to April 1, 2020, and the deposit would occur at the end of the biennium, or excuse me, the end of the fiscal year. And then there would be a second distribution at the end of fiscal year 2022. The estimate of the amount has increased. So at the time in May, we thought the amount was about $51 million per year, $103 million for the biennium. That has increased to about $62 million per year, or a total of $124 million for the biennium. So unless the legislature acts prior to April 1st, you can anticipate about $31 million going to the LSRA at the end of this fiscal year, $31 million going to the inviolate corpus of the PMTF.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Don, 240 million for the biennium, is that what you said? And then compare that 240 million that is available to what our total deficit would be, including adding the statutory reserve back in, or adding back in the 113 million. So do we does the 1% severance about cover what would be our total deficit if we profiled what the 113 million? Is that true?
Representative Summers, Chairman Bebout, the 1% would offset the actual budget gap of $112 million, right about perfectly. In fact, it would be a little bit more, maybe $10 million more. What it would not do is address anything related to the statutory reserve amount. So if you wanted to have a cash buffer, that would have to come from some other source, that cash buffer of about 113 million.
Okay, anything else? Hey, Don, while I'm thinking about it, and what I'd like to have you do, and of course, we got a big election, a week from tomorrow. And you look at those projections, and I'm not so worried about the pricing scenario on oil and gas as I am the volumes. And so just thinking out loud, there's a huge percentage of that, and maybe you already know that comes from federal lands. And so obviously, we're not going to shut in production on federal lands or be forced to do that. But if there's no leases moving forward other than the December lease sale that's coming up, and if we don't have any more leases on federal lands, what does that do to your volume? So, you can't answer that now because we don't know, but seeing what happens next week and assuming that there's no more leases on federal lands, at least in the foreseeable future, what does that do to our oil and gas revenues? So just let's put that on your list of things and we'll see what happens. And then maybe we can be talking about that. I think that, we talked about a triple whammy. We could have a quadruple whammy if that should happen. We can't develop any of our federal lands in the future. So just put that on your list if you would, please. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So Don, I want to go back to these numbers and maybe you could do a kind of a one-page analysis for us on, because, we hear the $112 million is now the issue, but what we really need to know is, it looks to me like we have a stopgap that will get us through maybe another biennium out of coincidence. But if you, for example, with the one-time 205 million, that's one time, we know it's one time. With the reversions of roughly 60 million, we know that that's one time dollars. We've got 80 million on the major maintenance. We concluded that 2% is probably the right number and that 1.5 is the wrong number. And so if we want to properly maintain our buildings, that should be a one-time number. And so now we're at 315 million. And then we've got the agencies, roughly 50 million of that is being one time. And so now we're at 360 million. So, and it is our practice, and we're going to want to have that statutory reserve amount of 113 million because that's best practices, and that's, so we shouldn't tinker with that. So, and with the 1% severance, we have other obligations and duties of those dollars for other responsibilities. And so we don't want to continue to rob that forever. And so what I'm getting at is, even though basically what you're telling us is we've got one more biennium to figure this out and to basically raise another $300 to $500 million just on the revenue side, or cut that, or sustain these as permanent cuts. And so it kind of unrosies the picture, if you will, but I think the picture has to be as accurate as we can make it to have rational discussions as we move forward and have all of us be able to articulate those numbers. And so I think that just might be helpful if we can kind of have a spreadsheet with one time, possible, not one time, and so that we can just be pragmatic about what our obligations and duties are going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to add to that too, Don, I think those are good points. And when we look at it, we talked about, so we all operate off the same sheet as to where we really are. And with this updated Craig, it'd be good to incorporate that. And I like what the co-chair is talking about. And of course, we need to do one for the school foundation program as well. Go ahead, Don.
Yes, we can do that. It becomes difficult for us to determine what is one time, because you could literally say a third of your budget is one time. All of the IT, for example, is not going to recur, but realistically, you're going to have additional IT requests in future years. So is that one time or is that ongoing? Same thing for capital construction. Well, that building is one time, but my guess is there will be another building request in a future biennium as to whether that's one time or ongoing. So recognize there's going to be a little bit of subjectivity in that response.
Well, and I understand that, but still, let's try to work on that, and we could get that back and send that out as review to the full committee and have some comments, because we still need to have a consistent paper or piece of information that we all work off of. And so
Don,
that there could be some differences there, but we still need to do that. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
yeah, sorry, Mr. Co-Chair. Don, it could be 3 columns, where we have those capital construction, those things that are occasional, but one time, but ongoing in a sense. You'll figure it out. We just, yeah. So I concur with the co-chair so that we can just, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Continue.
Mr. Chairman, I'll now move to the school side of the profile. The School Foundation Program in May 2020 had a projected budget gap of $515 million. Their budget gap is automatically fixed by a transfer from the LSRA to the School Foundation Program. That has been reduced to $310 million. In other words, an improvement of $205 million over the past 5 months. Now, here's where that $205 million came from. In the case of schools, there were 4 components. One is our revenue estimates were lower than actuals by $29 million, 28.7. In addition, there were a small amount of reversions of $4 million. The smaller amount of reversions is because the K-12 school districts don't revert money, but the agencies that receive School Foundation funding, like the military department for the National Guard Youth Challenge Program or the Department of Education, does revert some of their appropriations when possible. That is $4 million. Then the 21-22 forecast improved by $94 million. And then finally, the model overall has improved by about $79 million. So most of the K-12 is ongoing, meaning it's not quite the same issue as the general fund side. The reversions are probably not likely to be counted on in the future, and our 2020 $29 million known cash is likely not to recur.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And obviously, you made some assumptions on the education side. I believe I saw ADM, but I didn't get a chance to review the whole document to see what your revision was in ADM or what your projection was on ADM.
Yes, Representative Summers, Co-Chairman Bebout. I think Representative Summers is referring to the $79 million improvement in the model. The majority of that is actually from recapture due to higher commodity volume and prices. We did change 3 other material components. Number 1, we reduced our ADM projection from a 0.75% increase to a flat enrollment, meaning 0%. There's no question there are several school districts that will actually find themselves with declining overall enrollment. However, particularly the 2 school districts with online opportunities will likely receive an increase. And because you're likely to have an overall decline, meaning some students are going to move to private online institutions or for homeschooling or move out of the public education environment as a result of COVID and other decisions. The ADM does, the funding model actually gives the old school district, let's say it was from Pinedale, 2/3 of an ADM when that student leaves, because it's the 3-year rolling average. Plus, if that student started to take online courses from, I believe, Bighorn County School District number 1 offers an online opportunity, that online school district will get to count 1 full ADM. So combined, you could have, just because that student transferred from an in-person educational environment at one school district to an online environment at another school district, you would end up with actually funding 1.66 ADM, an increase of 2/3 of a person. We think that's going to counter effect the overall decline, and that's why we put it at 0. There were also 2 other components of the model just worth mentioning. We had included a 10% estimated increase in health insurance. The EGI, and you'll hear from them later in this meeting, has come out with their calendar year 2021 payments. And rather than an employer increase of 10%, the employer's contribution is actually going to decline by 2.7%. So we had anticipated a 10%. Employers are actually going to be paying 2.7% less. So that is a decline in the overall amount that we forecast for school districts. And then finally, historically, and this is not a Craig, this is an LSO estimate. Historically, we have identified a very modest amount and a fixed dollar amount for tax shortfalls. That's primarily taxpayers who go bankrupt and have, will not be paying their obligations on ad valorem taxes. That is becoming more and more relevant and widespread. So we're now projecting that at 3% of all tax liabilities will not be paid going into the future. We've missed that short for several years due to the number of bankruptcies, even dating back to the coal bed methane and now the coal companies. And we think that 3% number of all ad valorem taxes, primarily again due to bankruptcies in the extractive industries, is a better methodology for our tax shortfall. That actually is a increase in the model because the state guarantees those tax shortfall payments will be provided to the local districts.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Dawn, on the ADM, and I maybe misunderstood you, but what you said doesn't make sense to me. The ADM is what the ADM is as far as the projection. As you work it into the model, you would get that difference between whether you were increasing in the model or decreasing in the model. But ADM, are you projecting flat out ADM to be flat, or the effect of ADM changes to be a flat in the model, if that makes sense to you?
Go ahead.
Representative Summers, our ADM number is flat.
Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, so now as I understand it, the gap in on the school foundation side would be 310 for this biennium 21-22. What does that look like for 23-24?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, we will prepare the long-term profile. We'll actually go out a total of 5.5 years now, but we won't be able to do that until the first couple weeks of November. As a rule of thumb, you can double that number from 310 to at least mid 600 million. And the reason for that is only 1 year of ad valorem taxes is incorporated into 21-22. So it's going to have a doubling effect in the out years. So a rule of thumb is going to be somewhere around $650 million, but we will precise that going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions in that regard? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, finally, the school capital construction account, you'll recall in May with the Craig report, ended up with a negative $26 million projected budget gap. That has flipped to a total of a positive $6 million. There are 3 components of that switch. Number 1, known revenues exceeded expectations by $3.2 million. There were also some reversions and some infrastructure recapture totaling $4.7 million. But the big change there relates to state royalties, which the Craig increased by $24 million. That revenue stream is extraordinarily volatile. Let me repeat that. The revenue stream for state royalties is unbelievably volatile. The reason being is we're not just projecting price, we're not just projecting production, we're projecting whether or not the coal company is going to move to the east or going to move to the north. If they move north, it generates onto state lands, for example, it would generate additional state royalties. If they move east, it does not generate because it would be federal land or private land. So keep in mind that that revenue stream is going to be highly volatile. The reason I stress that is twofold. Number one, this account has no cash balance. So unlike the school foundation program, which has a $100 million cash balance, or the general fund, which has the statutory reserve amount of 5% of all revenues, the school capital construction account has no incorporated cash balance in the mechanism for that financing. Secondly, the other revenue streams are highly unlikely, they're fixed. They're transfer amounts that are guaranteed from investment income. They are capped amounts of federal mineral royalties. There's not another revenue stream like the general fund has. If sales taxes are down, maybe severance taxes or investments are up. The school capital construction account doesn't enjoy any potential realistic opportunity to offset state royalties if they come in lower. So it's a heightened risk there, but it's good news that we've moved from a negative 26 million to a positive $6 million. I just want to express some caution there.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Question for Dawn on that, and I'm trying to recollect, but is with the school capital construction account, is there some backstop in the LSRA for that or not, or is my memory faulty?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it has no backstop. So it's subject to any of the fluctuations. Historically, it has had a backstop. In fact, the school foundation program, we used to describe that profile as all of the money trickled down the page. That no longer happens. So the balance is what it is.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and Don, about the school capital construction account, and Representative Walters, not to put you in a spot, but I know we had a meeting last week, and I think the governor has taken a couple of those projects off the table. So the question I have is that money that was not spent in capital construction for schools, where did that show up, if anywhere, in our profiles? Or is it just sitting there? And then for you, Representative Walters, did you look at any projects or any budgets for ongoing forward spending of capital construction for our schools, or are we kind of in a holding pattern? Go ahead, Don, you first, and then maybe Representative Walters can jump in.
Mr. Chairman, I believe what the committee, actually it goes back to the governor, first of all. He put a pause on those two projects, one in Fremont County and one in Washakie County, as I recall. He did not eliminate them. So there has been no B11 that was approved that eliminates the funding. He basically pumped the brakes on those two projects. Under the current Craig outlook, those projects would be able to proceed. I don't believe the Select School Facilities Committee approved any new projects. They did approve an additional evaluation of all school buildings, and that came to around $6 million. I think they're going to precise that estimate, but the number they're playing with is $6 million, and I believe they proposed funding that from SIPA.
So then go ahead, jump in, Representative Walters, but there'll be no supplemental budget request for school capital construction. Is that a fair assessment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is an accurate assessment. There will be, coming from the school facilities, there will be nothing proposed in new projects. I think you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Co-Chairman Nicholas received a letter from the Select School Facilities requesting that JAC proceed with those projects that the governor had proposed putting a pause to, as we felt those were projects that the legislature had spoken loudly on and felt that they were important enough. And I guess at the time we were feeling like the governor was picking on legislative ideas and not necessarily executive branch ideas, and we wanted to push back a little bit in school facilities, feeling that those were appropriate projects. To Mr. Richards' point, because the governor proposed those as a pause, but never actually took, from what I can tell in in accounting documents, you might say, never took action to stop the funding to those projects due to the change in the Craig forecast here. I think Mr. Richards states it well that those projects are funded and would move forward. That is my understanding of the situation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything on that? Go ahead, Don. Kevin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because of the volatility of the revenue source for the SCCA, we did pump the brakes in accordance to what the expectations were on the May Craig, which what we use to manage our profile. So we did pump the brakes, but now that the Craig has returned here in October, we intercepted the B11. It's not been transacted and it's not going to be transacted.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? All right, go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, I'll briefly touch on our commodity specific and revenue stream specific expectations. First on oil, which begins really on page 6 as our table 1 on the comparison from May to October oil. Wyoming oil did experience a 20% decline, and we anticipate it to experience a 20% decline year over year. We had anticipated about a 40% decline year over year. We did have experienced a month where a significant amount of shut-ins occurred, and the total oil production dropped by approximately 45% in 1 month. Again, Wyoming oil production really slowed down. However, since then, it has rebounded. On the downside, however, we show that there are 3 oil rigs operating in the state as of this month, and that is insufficient to counteract the natural decline in all of the other oil rigs. So our projections don't anticipate net new production until calendar year 2022, meaning the natural decline will exceed any new production in the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, Don, and on that, what percent of our production roughly comes from federal lands? Do you know that number? I think I've asked that before, but it would be good to have you refresh our memories.
Mr. Chairman, in the last 2 years, you've seen quite an uptick, and I would attribute that primarily to the Converse County Southern Powder River Basin production. Right now, we're at approximately 77% of federal land production.
Thank you.
On the natural gas, again, the state of Wyoming has experienced significant decline. However, on the natural gas side, most of that decline has been the associated natural gas from the shut-in of oil wells, as well as the natural decline in existing methane wells. We're not seeing a significant increase in the shut-in activity of the strictly methane wells. Therefore, you will see a more modest decline on natural gas as compared to oil. We did increase the price in calendar year 2021 to $2.80 per MCF, despite the fact that we are sitting at near record storage in the month of October. Nonetheless, that $2.80 is substantially lower than either the futures market or EIA or several of the large investment houses. With respect to coal, we have a odd result. We actually are showing a one-time increase in calendar year 2021 in coal production. Our reasoning behind that is twofold. Number one, the COVID-19 shock in the spring of 2020 is unlikely to be replicated in our minds, and that severe decline in March, April, and May for coal production is unlikely to reoccur in calendar year 2021. Secondly, if you associate our increased price of natural gas, then coal becomes somewhat more competitive, and we're incorporating that into our production estimate. In addition, we are showing about a 70 million ton decline year over year from calendar year 19 to calendar year 20. So our 15 million ton increase in calendar year 2021 is just a modest amount of that huge decline that we're experiencing this year. Like the governor indicated, we did not have Arch's statement, but we did communicate with a number of folks last week, and we have prepared some rough estimates, which I'll just toss out for your consideration. If Arch Coal's comments of a reduction of about half of their total production will be reduced in the next 2 to 3 years, that equates to a 25 million ton impact. That, in terms of dollars, is about $15 million this biennium, all of which would occur in calendar year 2022. And then going forward, that would equate to approximately $40 million per year. I'm going to do a little bit of rounding here, but that $40 million reduction would be applied $20 million to the general fund BRA, $15 million to the school foundation program, and a little over $5 million to the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. So if you think that none of Arch Coal's production will be shifted to other producers in the area, and that they will indeed reduce by 50% in the next 2 to 3 years, that is the impact in financial terms to the state.
You know, while we're talking about that, Don, and of course, I think Peabody and Arch had gone to a proposal to combine in a joint venture their operations, and of course that was turned down. And it's hard to assess what that might have been, but Arch's reaction to that being turned down might be why we're seeing their production going down, rather than consolidating their operations with Peabody to eliminate some internal overhead costs. You know, I think that's what we're seeing. So you could very well see a significant or a similar situation with Peabody, since they were not allowed to join a joint venture on their operations up there in the Powder.
Moving on.
That was a comment.
Mr. Chairman, members, moving on to Trona. We actually did not increase our production estimate from May. So this is really the only commodity which we are sticking with the production estimate and making no change. And we actually reduced our estimate for price. In the global decline of world GDP, Trona is being severely impacted. And we believe that our May projection as to production is accurate, and that near-term prices will demonstrate additional weakness.
In the Trona market, before you leave there, of course, we have the federal side of it and their taxation. Was there not a move to reduce that in half or cut that? Was it temporary, permanent, or what's the status of that? Do you know, Don?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that has been incorporated, and their royalty rate is substantially less than 12.5% on oil and gas, for example. And I think that has been time limited, reduced in half. But I can get back with you and check that.
Yeah, check that out if you would, please. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on the Trona situation, Don, remind me the impact of the low commodity prices, particularly natural gas, if that's impacting China's ability to, again, impact through their synthetic Trona. It seems like I read something on that, but is that impacting the value of Trona as well? Or am I misstating that?
Representative Larson, Mr. Chairman, that is the traditional relationship. So with low energy prices, foreign synthetically developed Trona becomes more competitive because energy costs are such a high input. However, I think in this current environment, the real pressure to the downside is not the competition from other suppliers, but the overwhelming reduction in demand.
Okay, go ahead.
Moving on to sales and use tax. This has been a bit of a head scratcher, the strength of sales and use tax over the summer. However, when you step back and look at it, our estimate was really only off by 3.8%. We're just talking about such large numbers that it seems like it was a larger miss than that. And the diversity of sales and use tax collections across the state and by sector is extraordinary. You can see where wind energy and electric generation infrastructure is providing a real boon to some of the south central counties in the state of Wyoming, and the opposite is occurring with the extractive industries as well as the tourism industry counties. We did not anticipate any additional stimulus, but if we are wrong in that estimate, it is certainly possible that our estimate is too low. On the other hand, our estimate anticipates continued level of virus that has reduced economic demand, but not a overall shutdown, which occurred in the spring of 2020. With that, I'll move to investments, and I understand the time, so I'll try to proceed quickly on this. Our pooled income estimate has declined for two reasons: lower yields, as well as lower available balances or corpus to invest. Part of that is generated by actions of the legislature. The general fund used to benefit from the investment income of the Common School Permanent Land Fund Reserve Account and the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account, at least by statute. Both of those were changed in the 2020 budget session, and so the general fund has been adjusted accordingly. The record low yields on U.S. Treasuries is also impacted negatively the overall yield. On the PMTF side, our investment return estimate actually increased, but on the bottom line, it makes little difference because, as you know, to the extent the reserve account has sufficient funds, all of the PMTF income at 2.5% is guaranteed. So it makes little difference to the profile, but it was a slight uptick. On the other revenues, there are a number of positive bright spots, such as insurance premium taxes, total liquor sales through the state, as well as cost allocation. The state is generating a larger share of its expenditures, overhead expenditures, by more accurately and rigorously billing the federal government and other funds for those. Moving on to severance taxes and FMR, what this all means. We're basically back at FY 2003 levels on both FMRs and severance taxes, about 17 years prior. That is not a positive situation, and we're not anticipating a sizable rebound. Some of these commodities, such as coal, are not projected to come back. This is, in our opinion, a largely permanent decline. Hopefully, we will have some rebound when it comes to oil. We've also incorporated Chapter 155 from the 2020 session, which provided a severance tax incentive of up to 2% for all new production of oil and natural gas. On the federal mineral royalty side, we have also incorporated two items: anticipated lower auction results, regardless of federal policy, but given the market environment, we're anticipating lower bonus payments over the next fiscal year. In addition, the federal government, BLM, and Office of Natural Resource Revenue is providing federal relief to some oil and gas and other mining operations in the state. We have incorporated that royalty relief in our projections as well. I've spoke about the state royalties and its impact on the school capital construction account, so I will proceed and skip over that. And that brings us to assessed valuations. We did make a 1-year increase in the all other assessed value. That includes commercial, residential, and industrial and agriculture properties. We are certainly witnessing strong real estate prices in the residential sector, particularly in a handful of counties, such as Teton County, Park County, Laramie County, and even Natrona County. This, we anticipate, will be offset by declining ad valorem liabilities in some industrial sector activities. Overall, we have increased the rate of growth from 2% to 3% just for calendar year 2020. This will have a material positive impact on K-12 because of their reliance on the property taxes of other property. This is also just a one-time increase recognizing the stronger real estate economy. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move to the highs and lows. We did incorporate all of these appendices at the back, both showing the low estimate as well as the high estimate, but just some bottom line information there. We do this on a very detailed incremental level on both prices and production, as well as sales and use tax and investment income. We believe that the general fund budget reserve is bracketed by a potential increase of 290 million to the upside if we're wrong. And you'll recall that we were wrong in May. We were much closer to the high revenue forecast than we were the base forecast. We've also bracketed it to $260 million on the downside. The numbers I just read off to you there, 290 to the high side, 260 to the low side, are really a one-line response. That literally took us a week or more to come up with those numbers. This is a very data-intensive activity. On the school foundation side, we believe that the revenue estimate on the school foundation side is much more narrow, showing an upside potential of $90 million better. So rather than $310 million, we would move that to $400 million under a rosy scenario. And on the downside, we would reduce that by $80 million. Rather than 310, it would become $230 million shortfall. I will also mention our long-term profile. A few members from the Senate side have been working on what Co-Chairman Bebout referred to as an agreement to use one set of numbers. We will certainly incorporate a one-time scenario to that. But with Senator Kinski and Senator Hicks' permission, and I think a couple of other members, even some folks on the House side, Representative Schwartz has seen this new long-term profile. We would propose to use their template and replace LSO's longstanding long-term profile with their template going out into 2026, so about 5.5 years. I think they've put a fair bit of work into it along with staff, and hopefully provides a consistent methodology to illustrate not only to the JAC, but to your colleagues with your permission.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Co-Chair, have you seen that, what we're trying to put together there? Have you had or not? Okay, well, we want to be sure and get this out, and let's have, everybody needs to have some input on it, Don, and it's just good to have one set of numbers that we all agree on and how we do it. So shoot that out to everybody, you know, like today or tomorrow, and then give it a little bit of time. And then Bob, you and I can take a look at it and see what you think about it. We can come up with one number we all agree upon and one form and one way we do it. Is that okay, Mr. Co-Chair? Okay.
So that's not table 6, Mr. Chairman. Okay.
No. Okay, anything else on the Craig from the committee? Anything else? Yes, Senator Guru.
Just a quick question, not necessarily, well, it's all kind of wrapped in together. Don, I don't want to put you on the spot, but just a quick question about cash flows over the next 6 months. How are we looking physically on that as we head into this whole budget talk?
Excellent question. We did a cash flow analysis back in May, and we didn't anticipate any concerns until the first part of the year, January, February. Conditions have improved, and Kevin can chime in, but we foresee, particularly given the reduced outflows, the cuts that the executive branch has implemented, I see there will be a cash flow issue at some point, but we don't see anything through the spring of next year. So we can get to April, May, maybe even June under the current scenario. And I believe the budget office is in rough agreement with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, and along that same line too, Don, the state treasurer on an investment portfolio, they pretty well caught up, so they were getting some good information in a reasonable amount of time. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. They have improved all of their internal accounting. They are impacted by some personnel issues, some illnesses, and some delays in that respect. But generally speaking, we're getting the information about the 25th of the following month, which is months better than it was last year.
Yeah, and along that same vein, you know, when we look at our improved revenue picture, how much of that is related to one-time capital gains, if any?
Mr. Chairman, we did receive one-time capital gains. I think the number was about $60 million or so on the PMTF. We had actually projected higher capital gains. We rarely incorporate capital gains, but in the May report we did, because we were so close to the June fiscal year end. And wouldn't you know, the one time we included capital gains, we overestimated. That is a volatile. The one positive thing when it comes to capital gains is not on the permanent fund side, but rather on the operating side. You'll recall about a year and a half ago, we had a real challenge with some emerging market fixed income. Those were sold off. We took the losses, and with the decline in interest rates, our bond portfolio had positive realized capital gains, not capital losses, that were able to offset all of the prior losses in all of the funds and add some additional gains. Let me give one example. That Higher Education Excellence Endowment has about $115 million in it. Last year, they had over $18 million in income. So that's about an 18% return on that one fund.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So Don, on the education side, when you kind of put together our one-time funding versus ongoing funding, you'll do the same for the education side and also for the capital construction component of it. And you can circulate that and we can kind of tinker with it. Also, I think it would be helpful if you did like a short paragraph or two explanation of the impacts of not having cash on hand for cash flow purposes if we allow the LSRA to be absorbed for school funding and we deplete it, and how that's going to impact overall operations of government. Because as the governor talked about earlier this morning, I think it's important that we need to know the value to the state of having a certain amount of cash on hand that's readily available in order to do general operations of government. And what will happen to us if we allow that lizard to be depleted and not have that on hand. So would that be something I think would be fairly simple for you to do?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can do that.
Okay, anything else on Craig? Anybody have any questions on the goldenrod? It's also been presented to us. Any questions on the goldenrod? I think that's a great place to reference all the differences would be that, particularly that front sheet, it really shows you the numbers you need to look at. So no questions on the goldenrod? Okay, Karen, do we have anybody out there in the queue that wants to testify from the public side?
Mr. Chairman, we do have one person in the waiting room. However, the subject which they've asked to speak on is not doing with the Craig. So it's at your discretion if you'd like me to bring her in now or leave until a more appropriate time.
I tell you what we'll do. We're going to take a break, and you might discuss with that particular individual what they would like to comment on, and if it relates to a particular part of our agenda, then that would be the appropriate time and after we've discussed it. So let's go ahead and look into that. And with that, anything else, members of the committee? Senator Hicks, I've got a situation that came up. Let's adjourn for about 15 minutes. I show it being 10:04. Let's do 10:19, 10:20. And Senator Hicks, if I'm not back on, would you please take over and let run, if that's okay with you, Mr. Co-Chair? Is that all right? Okay, let's stand in recess until 10:20.
Karen, is it my understanding that there was somebody in the waiting room that wanted to public comment on the October Craig, or did I miss that?
We did have one person in the waiting room. However, she's decided at this time not to speak. And so she's left the waiting room. She may return at a later point though.
Okay, thank you. As soon as we get a quorum, we'll get started. And we're still live streaming now, Karen?
Yes, sir, we are.
All right. Looks like we got a quorum on the House side, still waiting for, maybe we can get Senator Guru on board here. Well, I don't know that that's going to happen. Ah, there he is. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reconvene this meeting of the Joint Appropriations Committee. The next item on the agenda is CARE Act's update distributions. Kevin and Erica, I don't know which one of you want to start out, but I'm going to turn it over to you for an update on CARES Act funding.
Mr. Chairman, this is Kevin. Erica's the lead on the CARES, so I'll let her take over and I'll back clean up.
Hopefully you don't need to.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks, Kevin. So my name is Erica Ligursky. I'm a senior policy advisor for Governor Gordon. And as Director Hibbert said, I'm kind of the one in the governor's office who's been administering the CARES program. I have worked closely with the state budget department, the attorney general's office, and also the state auditor's office to help administer these funds and also the reporting that's going to be coming on these funds on the back end. We've also worked with several agencies who are administering these programs. Just to name a few, that would be the Business Council, the Office of State Lands and Investments, WCDA, the Wyoming Community Development Authority, the University of Wyoming, Wyoming Community College Commission, and the Department of Education. I'd like to thank those agencies for all their hard work and assistance as we work through getting these funds deployed out quickly and then also managing those on the back end. To follow up on the governor's comments, I would like to provide some details regarding the CARES funding. Mrs. Vaughn said that she would share her screen with you guys to show the report that I had given. I had sent you a report per the instructions, for October 8th. We got out a preliminary report, if you will, that was as of September 30th. There has been some revisions to that report as this changes daily. So this report is as of 10/20. As we go through the presentation, I will point out some of those changes. The allocation has changed slightly. The amount that we've allocated has increased by about 8 million. And I've also included a few new slides on here. Ms. Vaughn, if you wouldn't mind going to page 3. So this says current plan, and then one more slide. This is the allocation plan of the 1.25 billion. As you'll see, this is the same report that we had given to you about a month ago or a couple months ago when we presented. All of the areas are the same with the exception of the, I'll start off with the evictions and food security. It's kind of on the bottom there. It says there's a 6 there. I apologize, I didn't put the M in there. That's 6 million. That has been decreased from the 16 million that was in that allocation. When we decreased that allocation, we put those funds to the judicial and legislative branch. We increased that to 14 million. And then we've also increased the testing and contact tracing an additional 3 million. So now that says 103 million right up above that. So those were the increases and stuff that we had regarding the entire 1.25 billion. And the remainder of that has stayed the same. I just want to, if you don't mind going to the next page. This right here is just a bar chart, if you will, that shows how those funds had been deployed out. So as you'll remember from the legislation, we had the 450 million available through at the very beginning. We had an additional 400 million that was available on July 15th, and then the remaining now is available as of September 15th through the end of the year. So that just shows you, as of right now, we're at 930. Oh, go ahead. That's fine, respond. Next page. So as you can see on there, it had a figure of 938 million. That is what we have allocated thus far. And as you'll remember, I think in some of the conversations, the way that we get to that allocated figure is that allocated figure is those monies that we have actually transferred or given the spending authority, if you will, via a B11, which in this case is close to 930 million. And then right now we're sitting with 8 million to where the agencies have been approved by the governor's office. It's gone through the AG process and has gotten its okay on there. And so we have about 8 million right now that we're waiting for agencies to get us those B11 so we can get those funds transferred. On this sheet, you'll notice from the sheet that you had on September 30th, the Economic and Business Relief Program looks the same. There is an increase to the educational resilience. It was 151 million, now it's at 161 million. That's the largest increase that we had kind of in some of these changes on here. We also have, and most of where that went to was an increase for student assistance. We had the student assistance food and housing program. University of Wyoming got some additional funding, and we were also able to give some funding to the Catholic College and also the Western Welding Academy. The broadband is still at 100 million, testing and contact tracing still at 81 million. Unemployment and workers' comp insurance is at 42 million. The local governments is still roughly running around the 114. We had the healthcare system is up at 67 million. The evictions and food security, that's where you'll see that that decreased from 10 million to 6 million. While the WEHAP program is, successful and it's getting some of those funds out, they're roughly around $1 million that they've given out. So it just was not meeting the need that we had thought there. So that's decreased, and that's where those funds then were redeployed. State agencies has ticked up a little bit with 14.3 million. And then we have where we talked about the judicial branch, and it went up to, there's 13 million there. So the total that we have allocated thus far to agencies is the 9.38 million.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, I have a question kind of on the allocated versus spent. And so, like, let's take the broadband, because I do know that number. You've allocated 100 million, but you've spent substantially less than that. 60 some million, if my memory serves me correctly, has actually gone out in contracts. So of this 938 million, and I think Dawn has given that number to us as well, but of that, what is actually under contract of that 938 million?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Erica.
So I'll probably have to get back to you on the specifics of that, and I can have Rob Krieger get together with me and we can get you a report on what are the specifics that have gone out in contracts on that. It's probably roughly really close to around where you had said on there. We have shown about 54 million that's gone out the door. That's one of those programs where we do anticipate getting some funding back, probably to the tune of 40 to 45 million is probably going to come back in that area. That to Representative Walters' conversation earlier, that we can redeploy elsewhere.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow up.
Go ahead.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Erica, it's not that I suggest that you reallocate it. I think it's a great place. Hopefully we'll get an extension to use that. My question though is on the total figure, the 938 million that you say is allocated, how much is actually allocated? How much is actually under contract in all of those things or spent in all of those things? And so, what is that percent, or just give me a rough percentage that you really have 80% out the door of that 938 million, or that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I can give you an estimate on that. That's one of the things that we are working on. As of right now, if you look into the Wolf system, it's 691 million that is in that area of where those funds have been allocated. That was something that the governor had kind of alluded to this morning. It's very different. We have the allocated figure that we give out. We have an obligated figure within that realm of what the agencies are going to obligate within those funds. And then you have those actual expenditures. One of the things that makes it a little more difficult that we've been working closely with the University of Wyoming and also the Community Development Authority is when we give them their money. So for example, Community Development Authority, we gave them 10 million. And that is showing that that is outside of the state's accounting system because that 10 million now resides with WCDA. We know that they've only spent a little over $1 million of that money. So we're keeping track of what they have there. We know that's why we were able to bring back some money from them. And so there's a very different line if you look at what has been allocated within the Wolf's accounting system versus what is obligated and actually spent. And then also there's the distinction too between it could be looking like it is allocated and spent in the state's accounting system, but those funds are actually being handled outside the state's accounting system. So that's something that we're working closely, like I said, with the state budget division and also the state auditor's office. We've notified agencies that we need to know by November 1st and or start working that first week in November of what actually they have that is unobligated, that we can either see how quickly we can get it out to those programs because that's where we would like that to go. Or if we aren't able to do that, and to your point, if we have an extension, that may be easier to get that money out. If we don't have an extension though, to Representative Walters' point, how can we get that money back quickly and redeploy it in places where we know the money can go out faster?
Just another follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Erica, you know, I've heard a little bit from local government, at least in my area, of being turned down on allocations that they felt were justified. So my question to you, and maybe you can get us this number, maybe it's in this report, I just didn't see it, is how much has SLIB turned down in requests from local government, hospitals, those kind of entities? I would be interested in that because it seems like here we are not spending our money, and there's been what people feel like are allowable expenses being turned down.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Summers, I do not have that figure in front of me, but I would be happy to reach out to the Office of State Lands and Investments and see if they can get me either a percentage or a dollar figure on those that have been declined.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Erica.
Senator Guru had a question.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Erica, real quick, and sorry, I've been kind of dipping in and out here for a second, so I didn't hear if you explained it. The money for the WCDA, I'm hearing from some constituents that they seem like they're getting lost in some red tape trying to access that money, that we've got organizations on the ground in Teton County that actually are supplanting that money right now. They're getting it out to people because they can't seem to get through the red tape at WCDA. Do you know anything about that, or am I missing something?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Senator Grew, I do know that they are trying to get that money out as quickly as possible. There are some restrictions within the legislation that we had and the way that that money is being deployed, that with the change in the rules that we had, the first rule seemed a little bit more restrictive. There was a change in those rules that have seemed to help with that. So they are getting that money out as quick as they can. They have actually put some additional people on there to help with just the time frame of getting some of that out. But I do know that we have had some conversations, if you will, with some private organizations, particularly in your area, who are giving those fundings out. And that's where we thought that money would be a little bit higher when we were looking at more of that 15 million versus the million that we've gotten out. We do know some individual organizations have given out as high as 2 million. We have tried to see if they can't, direct those people to the WCDA program, but I do think that there is where you said that those people are either denied or withdrawal and go to those private organizations because it seems a little looser. We have talked to those organizations about going to see if they can get reimbursed, if you will, through the Business Council program, since they are, I believe, within that nonprofit category to where those funds could be reimbursed. But that is something that we have talked a little bit about with the WCDA.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Erica, so I just like to compliment the Business Council. I think that they've done a good job of getting stuff out the door in short term. In fact, it's one of the best efforts I've seen Business Council do since think they've been in existence. And so my compliments to them. But my question comes back to local governments. Certainly, you can certainly see a difference between what local governments can get reimbursed for versus what the private sector can get reimbursed for. Is the Treasury guidance for local governments just that much more strict, or are we seeing our initial response to local governments, because they was probably the first to be ready for submission? Are we going back and reevaluating and seeing if maybe there's room to now fund some of that stuff that they'd ask, or is the guidance just that strict?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Larson, I do believe that it is that strict. One of the things that we have had, and one of the conversations that we did have with the Office of State Lands, was also in regards to, if there is an extension. I do believe some of those projects and stuff were denied surely based on the fact that they wouldn't meet the time frame of the December 30th. So there has been a conversation of, is that something that we would, reopen that if there was an extension? The other thing that is also problematic, I think, is the budgeting aspect of it. Were these things that these local governments within, the state, for example, are there things that we are asking for that have already been previously budgeted? If it's already been previously budgeted, we cannot pay for those things. And that goes to, we have had some discussions, and I don't have an answer yet, but we still are in some discussions with the restrictions between, the private sector being able to help with payroll. Whereas the public sector, there's, a lot of restrictions as far as how you can reimburse for payroll for someone who is mitigating the COVID response.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So, and I think that's interesting, because what I think we find, particularly in some of these smaller communities, is that they indeed budget for some of these items, but then they may also be basing their budget on revenue they expect to generate from maybe one of the budget items, and then they're finding the revenue's not there. So the revenue that would have been used for the budget is gone, but we can't capture that lost revenue. Am I saying that correctly?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Larson, that's correct. Right now, for the public entities, there is no guidance in there. Actually, there's, I guess I would say not no guidance. There's guidance in there that very explicitly says that you cannot do revenue replacement. And so that's where we're finding that hardship, because just as you explained, it's the revenue not coming in. It's not the expenditures going out, but we cannot do revenue replacement right now. That was one of the things that we were hoping that if Congress had done an extension, they would do an extension along with that revenue replacement, but I'm not very hopeful of that right now.
Thank you, Erica.
All right, go ahead, Erica.
Okay, Mrs. Vaughn, if we can go back to that last slide that we were on. This right here, so we just kind of ended up here. This is the slide that shows the dollar figures. On the next slide, Mrs. Vaughn, this is the just a graph that shows the percentages of what we went over as far as details of the 938 million on the previous page. This is on the governor's website. We try and get this updated weekly if we can for those changes that we have, and it'll show the allocated amount and then also this the plan amount that is out there. And so that's under the Web Sense section of the governor's website. The following two slides, is fun. If you want to go to the first next slide. This is the 1.25 billion. In order to get it all on one slide, this is for 100 million and above that we've allocated. This kind of goes back to Representative Summers and also Representative Walters' questions regarding getting the spend out. So the blue line is going to be what we've planned for. The red line is the amount that has either been transferred to those agencies or is awaiting on the B11. And then in the yellow column, that shows the WOLF's expenditures. So you can see in some cases, for example, with the business plan, we do think we have transferred that entire amount out to the Business Council, the 325 million. They've done a good job of getting that money out to businesses, which is another reason why we think with a program that they're going to be opening up later in November. And then if we have to have some money returned, we do think that we can get that expedited through that business relief program if we needed to. The local government response program, That is coming up. There was 200 million that's allocated there. There's still some money that they have to have allocated to those agencies. We did the percentage calculation, telling the locals, what they had been, what they're eligible for, and then those are coming in on a reimbursement basis. So we'll see that coming in a little bit slower, as that is a reimbursement basis.
Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt?
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Erica, I think this graph is great because hopefully it will, through a colorful format, be able to answer the question many of us have been asking. Would you describe the red bar or the yellow bar as meeting the definition of spent to meet the CARES Act requirement? Not worried about the dollar value. I'm just wondering, is it the yellow or the red that meets that definition?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Walters, I think for your question on there, and if I understand where you're getting to, so that we don't have to return money at the end of December 30th, I would say that you're looking at that yellow line.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Erica. That was my question. So that money doesn't have to be returned. Anything that isn't spent returned. So that would be the yellow line is what we would be tracking in this regard.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Erica.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the ones just to point out, you guys can see that, like you said, the graph on here, the Agricultural Business Relief Program, we have given 10 million currently out to that program for supply chain relief. We are looking the first part of November, I believe it's November 2nd. The Business Council will open up a new Ag Business Relief Program to the tune of 90 million. So we should see that line spike, the red line, if you will, spike and go up to match the blue. And then as they get those programs out, if the indication from how they have run the business relief program, if that's in the same vein as the ag relief program, I would see that yellow line closely trending that.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Senator Bebout.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the ag, that's a lot of money to try to get out in a short period of time. What is the parameters or definitions of what that would be utilized for? Do you happen to know those offhand, Eric? If you don't, could you distribute to the committee? And then the second question would be on the healthcare system. We've had a lot of discussion about incurred and what that may mean or not mean, and the interpretation of the Treasury Department and back in Washington versus what I think it means. Any changes there on the health side? There's still some rural hospitals out there that need to help on some funding. I'm thinking of Saratoga, Pinedale, Riverton, northeastern Wyoming. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
For the parameters for the ag relief, I don't know many of the specifics, but I can get that back to you. I can look at those rules that they have that they're promulgating for that program. My understanding is that it would be similar to the kind of the regular business relief program. I do know that there's a loss aspect in there for those, and that's one of the things that's different from the public versus the private, as some of that lost revenue from not being able to get their product to the end result, I think would be the biggest component in there. And then as for the healthcare, that's running through the OSLI program. I can get you some more specifics on that when I turn and ask the Office of State Lands. One of my understandings, though, for some of those healthcare applications that were put in was that it was really the length of time that they were going to have for some of those projects. Could they be done by December 30th? But I can check with them and see when we talk about that denial rate, what some of those asked for, and if they are seeing some requests from those specific areas that you asked for.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Eric, I'm curious, given the recent surges in cases and hospitalizations, is your hearing from the hospitals that they might have increased requests coming up prior to December 30th?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I have not specifically. I do know that there are some conversations and stuff that they have had with Jen Davis and then also Rennie McKay. I do know that we had given out just recently 20 million to the Department of Health to help assist with that. And I do know that some of that money is going down to the county level, particularly for testing and contact tracing. So we do have another reserve of 20 million to go out to the Department of Health to assist with those. But I have not heard from the Office of State Lands if they have had an increase of applications, if you will, for specifically for the hospitals. I do know that when we had talked, and this was a couple weeks ago, to the Homeland Security, that I believe as far as PPE and those types of things, that the hospitals were still doing okay with the supply that they had.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Continue, Erica.
Okay. Ms. Vaughn, do you want to go to the next slide, which is the 125 million, and then it's 100 million or less, I believe that's allocated. So yeah, less than 100 million. So this one right here is the unemployment and workers' comp insurance. You'll see we had allocated to them 60 million. We've given out a little bit of about 40 million. This is one of those areas that the governor had mentioned earlier, and we do have kind of on some other slides, that if we have some excess funding, we know that we can get money to the Department of Workforce Services and get that money out quickly, either in the unemployment insurance group or the workers' compensation fund for a rate holiday. State agencies, this is one area where we're looking at the spend on here. We do have some reimbursements that are going out to state agencies. We have given state agencies hazard pay for those who meet that criteria. And as I alluded to earlier, we're still working through the process with the Attorney General's office regarding, is there a way that we can do some reimbursements for payroll on there? The reimbursements that we've given to state agencies has been for technology, for social distancing measures that they've put in place, also some telework and items for allowing those folks to telework if they can. As you can see, some of these other areas that are on here, we talked a little bit about the evictions and food security, so I won't go into that. The tribal preparedness, judicial branch, and tourism, they're doing pretty good on the spends that we have from what we've allocated to them.
Erica, I've got a question for you. When I look at this and based on the previous slide and this one, you know, and so we're looking at someplace right now, $300 million that hasn't been expended. I know the governor's asked for an extension or is preparing to ask for an extension of those expenditures. But what's the plan, or do we have someplace that we're going to put that money, unemployment, workman's comp trust, if in fact we get to December 31st and we don't get an extension and we have a significant amount of revenues? Where do you anticipate that money would flow?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a slide at the end where I can show you that, or if you'd like me to jump to the right there right now, I can.
All right, we can wait. Representative Larson, you've got a question.
Thanks, Co-Chairman Hicks, or Vice Chairman Hicks. Erica, going back to the agencies, we had a lot of the agencies applying for money, as you pointed out, because they was working remotely, the technology and stuff that was associated there. We initially thought about mid-summer that might be an ongoing long-term cost savings to the state by allowing more remote working for state employees. I'm seeing evidence now from articles that I'm reading that may not be, that we weren't the only ones thinking that way, and that there, but maybe evidence has proven maybe not to be quite as significant. That savings may not be quite as significant as they had thought. Do you guys, as you've looked at that, what are you giving the agencies any direction on how you'd like to move forward with that? Because that impacts leasing on buildings and a number of other things. What have you discovered?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Larson, so there have been some discussions around that, and there are still some discussions about that. I do know that some state agencies have started bringing some people back if they had, you know, the appropriate, had gone through OSHA and the ANI, and were able to safely bring individuals back. I do know that with some of the increase in cases that some agencies have not done that. I do know that the telework study that was out, I don't know if you guys have gotten a copy of that. ANI worked with ETS and did a telework study Those seem to actually show pretty favorable. I do think that there are some agencies and some individuals who are doing very well at teleworking and that there are benefits from that. And then there also are some areas as to where those may need to be revisited as to if that telework is actually working. I can get you some more specific data on the thoughts of that, but I do know that that topic has come up about the teleworking, and then what do we do with some of these leased buildings if we allow those people to telework? Is there a need for that?
So nothing really conclusive at this point, still investigating options. Is that fair?
I would say that's fair, Mr.
Thanks.
Representative.
All right, continue, Erica, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Vaughn, if you'd go to there, it says items finalizing in November. So right now, we have kind of a process that we go through where state agencies put their proposals through. We go through those proposals and look at them. If we have decided on our side that they are an okay to move forward, we turn those over to the agency to get some information to the Attorney General's office, and then we'll look at that before we make the final decision on there. Right now, we have about 24 million that's sitting in that hopper. It's additional technology requests. There is some money going out for additional student aid that could go out to the universities. There's some funding in there for some additional testing at the school level, some funding for mental health, and then possibly some funding for the cultural arts area. Those are items that we're looking at. Like I said, there's about 24 million in there. In addition to that, these items finalized in November, the Department of Health is continuing with their testing and contact tracing. As the governor alluded to, you can get an at-home kit now to test yourself at home, looking at a screen and sending that back in. There has been some money that has gone out to the county level so that counties can contract and hire contact tracing individuals to help with that. We mentioned the Agricultural Business Relief Program, which is about 90 million that would go there. We do know that the Office of State Lands is still working on the local health and tribal support. We just alluded a little bit to state agencies. And then we do have an additional request that we're anticipating from K through 12, which would be about 14 million. And that would be for additional telework and also some Wi-Fi capability in the parking lots. Next slide, please. Mr. Chairman, this hopefully will help answer some of your questions. One of the things that we have been working with agencies, and I think I alluded to earlier, is we've had some meetings. The State Auditor's Office has had some meetings with agencies talking to them about their reporting requirements and what that means. In those meetings, we're just reminding agencies to make sure that they know, how quickly they're going to get this money out. If we've given them money, are they going to actually spend that, or has it been obligated within the system? And then we're wanting them to keep track of that unobligated figure so that they can report back to us. We have told them that starting this first week in November, we're going to be reaching out to them and asking them, do you have plans? Have you had contracts? What are you going to get out by December 30th? And then what money do they think that they can return to us quickly mid-November to be redeployed? We're still hoping for, an extension. If there is an extension, that'll change that conversation a little bit. So it is a fluid conversation. Those agencies that we have given money out to, we want them to continue to spend that as aggressively as they can. And if there is an extension, we'll make a determination if they need to keep those funds because that's what we originally allocated it for, or if there is some funding that we can get back and redeploy. So that would be if there's no extension. If we do not get an extension, the places that we've looked at and we've kind of alluded to a little bit, the Economic Relief and Business Program, as you've said, that's been very successful and we're able to get that money turned around fairly quickly. So I think the Business Council's done a great job there. And I do think that that would be one of the places we can get money out quickly. The unemployment insurance, the rate stabilization, that essentially is just a transfer of funds over to that account. So I think that we can improve that very quickly. We're looking at giving them an additional 20 million as it is. And I think that we could bump that up if the need was there. We want to make sure that those rates are stable, if not lower than they are right now. We have given the money, I think as the governor alluded to earlier, for the workers' compensation rate holiday. We gave that money out. I don't know if there would be another opportunity for us to give an additional rate holiday, but that is something that we have kind of slated in here to look at. And then as we've alluded to the healthcare system and also local governments, with the increase in cases and potentially having a severe winter, want to make sure that there's some additional funding for the healthcare providers and local governments for the response.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Erica, on the additional workers' compensation rate holiday, of course, we had an existing statute that provided 1 month rate holiday. That went out the door. I know that did. Talk to me about what the additional was, the amount of money, how they calculated. Do you know that? Or if not, would you please get that to the committee?
Mr. Chairman. Co-Chairman Buba, at this time, I don't have that figure. The original amount of what we sent out earlier was, I believe it was around 16 million was that we sent out for that first rate holiday. I do not have an additional figure right now, as that was just something that we slated to say, you know, if we need to get money out quickly, how can we do that? I can double check with that and get back to you, but my guess would be probably close to around that same dollar figure of around 16, 17 million.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you would, please. And of course, one of the things that I think we often overlook through this whole COVID issue is the small businesses. And this, this relief provided by workers' comp is huge. So need to know where we are. And boy, if we can get some more money out to these smaller businesses, we sure need to do it. Thank you.
Erica, along that line, could you just highlight what the unemployment insurance stabilization, what exactly are we accomplishing with that? And is how much money would we have to reallocate if we wanted to increase that or extend that too?
Mr. Chairman, for that, I could ask, we've been in contact with workers' comp to look at that. As of right now, we've sent out 25 million, and my understanding with that 25 million is that's a pretty good place to keep that rate stable. But I can check with them to see what we can get out to ensure that that rate is stable, and then if it could go lower.
All right, thank you. I had a question, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Erica, you multiple times in the presentation mentioned an extension. And I think maybe 3 months ago, an extension seemed more likely than one today, but it seems like a lot of these plans are based on receiving an extension. And so your contingency, while I appreciate it, I'm not sure that it would expend $500 million in the month of December, if that's what it comes to. You know, we have 2 months left here, and the business relief program was an excellent program, but to get 100 million spent in a month or 200 million spent in a month might be problematic. And so do we shift 200 or 300 million to the unemployment account just because we can do that simply? I guess I just am really extremely fearful that we have put too much weight on an extension and not enough on just getting it spent and getting it spent now. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, no, I hear your concern on that as well. Like I said, I think an extension, there are some things, and I do think that we've been kind of hopefully good as far as we haven't approved anything based on the hope that there is an extension. So I do hear your concerns that we need to get this out as quickly as we can and not bet on that extension.
Second question, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really a follow-up, but a second question rather. Of approved or allowable expenditures, could money be spent on a one-time COLA for retirees, or placing some of the money in the retirement account so as to more shore it up and move it from the 75% funded up to 80% funded or something in that effect? Kind of two questions there.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Walters, I do not know the answer to that question. That would be something that we would have to look into, and I can get back to you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So Erica, to get back to hospitals, because I noticed on that one page you referenced what might need to be spent based on a severe winter. And I'm just wondering, when you look at that for hospitals beyond contact tracing and testing, what are you considering to be appropriate allocations of money for them?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Schwartz, I think that that would go back to looking at what some of those requests have been through the Office of State Lands and Investments. I think we would need to look and see what some of those requests are as far as what those hospitals are thinking that they're going to need to sustain to get them through the end of the year.
Follow up, if I may.
Go ahead.
It's really as much a comment. I just know watching some of our adjacent states and the issues their hospitals are dealing with. I know Utah is in particular having problems and having to start triage patients and things like that. So I can't say strongly enough how concerned I am about this issue.
All right, any other comment on this section? All right, Eric. Oh, no. Kevin's
Mr. Chairman.
waving his hand. Kevin, you want to weigh in?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you can navigate in Google, just go Wyoming budget, and you can see our website. And in that website, you can find the COVID B11 NAFTA report. And that gives you the status of the governor allocations, the agency encumbrances, the expenditures. And like Erica has said, we're getting more and more aggressive about making sure that we get this out the door each week that we go through. I think
All right.
Don Richards also has the link to that report that he can provide the committee.
Okay, any other comment on this section? Erica, are we getting close? Nope.
Chairman, I am finished unless you have any other questions.
All right, any other questions from the committee for Erica? Kevin, you want to add anything or?
Mr. Chairman, I had wrapped up my comments just a couple of seconds ago. Thank you, though.
All right, Karen, do we have anybody waiting in the lobby for public comment on this section?
We do have one person that we've brought into the room. If she wants to go ahead and turn on her video and audio, we can receive her comments.
All right, let's do that now. If you'll go ahead and let them in for public comment.
Ms. Livingston, you've been entered into the room. Would you go ahead and unmute yourself and turn on your video so that we can receive your comments? I'm sorry, sir. It looks like she might be having some difficulties.
All right, well, with that, if she gets back on, we'll provide that opportunity for public comment. Right now, next thing on the agenda is item 6, which is the agency fee survey results. Do we have Michael Swank? Michael.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The floor is yours, or the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to cover is the agency fee survey that we sent out based on a June 9th committee request. I'm not going to get into a lot of details. I just kind of want to show you a few things on that document and then go over some summary points. So I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Is that quick?
Well, it was going to be quick. Okay. Well, I can get it here. There it is. Too many screens, I apologize. So do you see the memorandum from October 8th?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I wanted to go over is that based on the request from June 9th, we also Budget Fiscal formulated this request, and we kind of patterned it off of some requests from last interim related to the Department of Agriculture and the Judiciary when the Joint Appropriations Committee sponsored a few bills for a couple bills to increase fees related to those particular agencies. We wanted to get a broad base of information And I believe the intention was to have this information ready for budget hearings coming up in December. But we also wanted to provide you a quick summary and kind of open it up for some discussion prior to the budget hearings in December. So this document provides basically 11 fields of data related to all the agency fees for which the agencies reported back. I did want to note that this document does not include professional licensing boards, the minors hospital, or the judiciary, and the Wyoming Energy Authority. And then one other note I wanted to make is that we were specifically requested certain agencies that issue different types of taxes or assessments, that those are not included. So you have the Public Service Commission's assessment, you have the Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's assessment, those types of things that are not included in this straight administrative or service fee overview. The next part of the document, which I think is where what I want to go to, is the summary table of agencies that submitted the response that has fees. So what I've tried to do, and I may have done this, I may have helped you part way, but not full way. So at the agency name, what you can do is you can click on the agency name and that'll navigate you to the specific agency and the fees that they responded with. So the first one I'm going to go to is the Secretary of State. I can touch that and that'll go to their first page of their fee list. Now, different agencies provided different levels of detail and different levels of narrative for their responses. So some of them can get very detailed, a lot of information. And as you can see from the Secretary of State, it may be a little bit difficult to read online because of all the information they provided. So that's kind of the way to navigate this document. The reason why I said I may have helped you part way is I didn't actually put a link to go back to that summary page. So if you want to go back, you can either scroll down through the agencies or you can go back to the table and pick a different agency. So whether that's the Department of Health, another agency with a large amount of fees, that'll take you to the Department of Health's fee page. One of what I wanted to do is summarize quickly what we received in this request. And I did want to give a shout out to all the agencies that worked for 2.5 months to submit their responses. Our request went out on July 1st, and by the middle of September, we had all of the responses. So very big thank you to the agencies for pushing through and getting this information in general, but also during some of these more difficult times. The main summary I wanted to provide is that from this list of agencies, there's 30 agencies that provided some form of response that had a fee attached. Now there are basically four different categories I would classify this in. First, you have some agencies with a very few fees or maybe one fee or something like that. Those agencies include the State Auditor's Office, Department of Administration and Information, the Military Department, the Water Development Commission, the Wyoming Retirement System, Department of Corrections, Wyoming Business Council, Wyoming Department of Education, and the Office of Administrative Hearings. Those 9 agencies really have maybe 1, 2, or 3 fees that they say that they provide for. Several of those were for public records requests and so forth, but don't have a lot of fees in which they receive, that they implement or that they receive revenue. The second category I would say is kind of a special category, and that's the governor's residence, where they state they have 1 fee or a couple fees, but in general, the fees for that they use are basically space rental fees, and those go into a foundation for the governor's residence and do not actually go into the state's accounting system or do not go to a state funding source. The third category I would bring up are agencies that assess fees that really don't go any place but a special revenue fund or an other fund. So those would be the Department of Audit. The fees that they provided, their summary, are basically all fees related to the Division of Banking. And those fees go for the administration of that particular division. The Game and Fish Commission or Game and Fish Department, the Department of Transportation, their fees go into the highway user or the highway fund. The Livestock Board, most of the fees they have, I think all the fees they have do go to special revenue, whether those are brand inspector fees and so forth. The Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, aside from their conservation tax assessment, excuse me, they have a few permit or application fees that they assess. And then the University of Wyoming and community colleges, the Community College Commission itself does not assess fees, but all the individual colleges and the University of Wyoming assess course fees, student fees, those types of things that are outlined. And I will say that this memo is item 6-01 in your materials. I'm sorry, I didn't say that at the beginning. And then the UW fee book is 6-02 in your materials. We did not go further with the community colleges and get the actual course catalog or request a specific fee book from each college. The last category I'd like to go through is the fourth category, and I think this may be the most relevant for this committee. And those are the fees that impact agency operations and potentially the general fund in a direct sense. So there's 14 agencies. The example I provided earlier, or I can provide this example here, which is the Department of Health. They have fees that are assessed, say, for one of the state institutions, the state hospital, State Life Resource Center, that sort of thing. But they also have fees that go to the general fund. So you have these fees that are shown right here on this page. Let me scroll down here. The community swimming fee per diem for clients at Department of Health Service for Department of Health Services, those go directly to the general fund. And there are 14 agencies that show fees going to the general fund. Those are the Secretary of State, Department of Agriculture, Department of Revenue, the Attorney General's Office, Department of Environmental Quality. The Public Service Commission does have assessments that do, or fees that go to the general fund, even though they are, the agency itself is funded by its utility assessment, which is a special revenue. The State Parks and Cultural Resources Department, State Engineer's Office, Fire Prevention and Electrical Safety, Department of Insurance, Department of Health, Department of Family Services, Department of Workforce Services, and the Office of State Lands and Investments. Those 14 agencies provide information that show they have fees that go directly into the general fund. And a few of them also go into other special revenue. My understanding is that unless there is a specific requirement, either in rule or in statute, for it to go to a special revenue, it is directly allocated to the general fund. The last item, and I wanted to I guess, sum this all up in a sense that my understanding is this was requested for two basic purposes. One was to get an idea of what fees actually impact the general fund. And the second was to understand where there may be fees that are old or low or in different forms may not necessarily cover the cost of services for which those fees were originally associated. So in moving forward with this information, I guess there are a couple of potential strategies that I might put out there and may spur some committee discussion. The information kind of can be taken hold of in two different ways. There may be and I believe Don has touched on this in the past, Don Richards. The JAC can utilize this information either in the long term, say for an interim committee review, or there may be reason for members of the Joint Appropriations Committee to have members of the committee take hold of agencies for which they are assigned budget duties or budget review and see if they can parse through the data in a little more detail. The second, I would say the second potential strategy is to refer different agencies to the interim committees for which they report. So whether that would be joint corporations, joint education, that sort of thing, to see if those committees can parse through the data in more detail and provide recommendations on where fees should go. Mr. Chairman, that is kind of my summary, perhaps not so short, but I appreciate your time and I stand for questions and I will encourage committee discussion on where this should go.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Just one thing, did you give any thought when I look at the dates on those as to when they were last changed? You know, one of the other options that we may want to consider would just be to take those as the JAC, and if they haven't been updated in, say, the last 3 to 5 years, just indexed them from when they were last changed based on inflation. So if they weren't changed, last time was 1994, you calculate the inflation from that, and then that would be the new fee of the agency, and just do that globally across all those fees. Is that something, Michael, that might have an application, or is it more complicated than that?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is one strategy the committee or other interim committees could take. I know at different times the legislature has attempted to do indexing or inflation adjustments to fees, and depending on the fee, when they were set and how high they were set, there may be a disproportionate impact relative to either it being too high or too low compared to what most people might assess today in that same arena. So I know whether it's a fee for a driver's license or those types of things, they may have been set at a certain rate, say in the 1970s, and indexing them may bring it up to an amount that may seem unreasonable. Those are just different considerations. I'm not advocating for or against, but I believe indexing is a potential strategy depending on how far back you go.
Well, it seems to me like that would be something that we could look at prior to December and see what that looked at. I don't know about the rest of the committee. I don't know how we'd hand this off to the standing committees and get anything between now and December and the supplemental when we start working the budget. So any other suggestions for the committee or questions for Michael? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I want to start by complimenting you, Michael. This is really a wonderful piece of information. My only problem, I have old eyes. I was wondering if, in addition to this, you could do a slightly scaled down version by eliminating a bunch of columns. I mean, I look at things like statutory authority and Wolf's codes and things like that, that at least for me would make it easier to read. And judging by the expression on Co-Chairman Hicks's face, he might agree with me.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, we can kind of bring this down into what you would prefer, whether it's by a committee or by a person. We wanted to make sure we got you all the information that we requested, and then we can assist you at how you need to between now and the budget hearings and how it's applied.
Great, thank you. I'll get back in touch with you. Like I said, I really do appreciate it. I have a hard time reading it sometimes.
Yeah, I couldn't find any readers that had the level of magnification to get there either, Representative Schwartz. Co-Chairman Nicholas, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, so if you, I scrolled through this over the weekend, and I mean, there are a couple different mechanisms to do it. But the easiest way to do it, I mean, in terms of just revenue enhancements, is there's some low hanging fruit out there. And you just go to the big dollar ones and a change will actually make a difference. So my thought process is kind of put it back to the committee. I think that if we wanted to put together a working group between now and December, who can then just spend a couple hours once or twice to kind of peruse this, and I think you can break it down to the ones that really make a lot of sense for revenue enhancements. There are ones that just probably need to be raised just as a practical matter that are pretty simple. But each one of these is a statutory change, and so it will be a lot of work to get things done from the LSO standpoint between now and January. And so it may be a continuation where we kind of do the easy, low-hanging fruit first of all, and then more of an overall review with perhaps some committee review as well from the various standing committees when we come back, when we go out of session back in March. So that would be my suggestion. If we really want to do this, we'll just pick 2 or 3 guys or 4 folks that want to kind of go through the exercise. But realistically, when I'm looking at this, I think we could probably come up with 15 or 20 million that is reasonable and not exorbitant, just by doing some homework on it. So that's my 2 cents.
Representative Summers, you had a comment, and then I'll go to Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And and I agree with Co-Chairman Nicholas, but Senator Hicks, I also agree with you. I think there's some validity in even though there's big dogs in the fee thing, there's also a matter of equity. And so we're going to raise your fees, but we're not going to raise your fees because those fees are small and don't really matter. And to me, I think people need to understand, one, what are our costs? And if you do something like Senator Hicks suggested, I think there is a measure of equity in it that maybe wouldn't be there otherwise. And so I agree with the work group idea, but I do believe that we have to consider equity across the deal as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson, and then we'll go to Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just say that I've already kind of started that exercise on the agencies that I have been assigned to, and I think, at least for me, I like being able to do that because I think the members of the committee know their agencies better than maybe a work group would know the agencies as a whole, and I think that we could come back to our November meeting with, or before, we could make that recommendation back to where you could have one bill drafted and can be considered in the November meeting. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, Representative Larson's, but if you do that, you won't have any continuity between one agency and the next. Getting back to Representative Summers as far as an equity, I mean, I can go through my agencies and change those, but if I'm working on a different formula or calculation than you are, so I think you're probably right, but I do think that there's going to have to be a universal decision made as to what direction we're going for. We could do that. But with that, I want to turn it over to Senator Kinski, unless you had a response, Representative Larson.
Yeah, I would, because there isn't equity between agencies. Every agency is a little bit different, and how those fees are generated is a little bit different. That's why I think following on the expertise of the people that know it really makes sense. But because I don't think you can use a standard formula and make it apply to all agencies. I just don't think that works.
All right, Senator Kinski.
I'd just like to make a pitch for turning it over to the relevant standing committees. There's sufficient detail in Michael's work that they can be pointed right at what they need to get to. And every one of those fees has a constituency. Every one of them, you just don't know what the impact's going to be. I can see us deciding we're going to raise this one, that one, or the other one, only to find out later, gee, if we'd had a little bit more time, if we'd been able to hear in greater detail from the agency or the constituencies, what might we have done different? So I'd like to make a pitch for giving that to the standing committees, relevant standing committees for each agency.
Any other comments? Yeah, my only thought on that would be is if you're going to try to do anything prior to the session, many of the committees have already had their last meeting, so I don't know how you hand that off without going to management council and then ask them to provide additional budget for the committee to meet between now and in January. So I don't know, unless you're suggesting we put it off for a year and then assign that to the standing committee, Senator Kinski, how that would work.
Oh, I would just have them do it when they get down here for session.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think if we go down the path of Representative Larson, we just, whoever the Senate and House cohorts are on, whoever the Senate and House cohorts are on any one agency, then they would work together to maybe build those fees. That would be another route to make sure we're not doing it independently, kind of working together anyway.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Great deal of time.
So to me, the answer is all of the above. I think if we have a working group, that then the individual House member or Senate member with a particular agency, they can review it, they can report back to that working group so we can get something done between now and in January, February. Also, I think your idea, Mr. Larry, is a good one, of having some general increase, whether it's 1%, 5% across the board of most things. I don't know if we want to put a time frame on it, because as you run through these fees, some of them have been set since the 1990s. Some fees were reduced. So that it really goes all over the board, but I think it's not too complicated to be able to do some generic monitoring and do a general assessment on. But we do need feedback, I think, from LSO on how cumbersome it would be to put a bill together that would capture every one of these. So I think we can have a working group who can coordinate with everybody on and ask for input on particular agencies. We can ask the individual standing committees to further up and follow up on it next year through the interim, and kind of capture every one of our thoughts to basically help overcome and do an assessment that really hasn't ever taken place, and do it coherently with one group, so that we kind of at least have a tracking mechanism and we can articulate on the floor and to everybody else what we're doing.
Yeah, Senator Kensky, I don't know, we lost you there for a while. We had bad reception. Are you back with us? Can you hear, or did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I had my say. I'm fine. I'm fine with whatever the group decides.
We're breaking up again. So the only thing I would add to that, Co-Chairman Nicholas, is this is, and again, I think,
Were you able to hear that? I said I'm fine with what.
I would suggest that those cohorts between the Senate and the House, whoever those agencies, get together and get that together. But I would also suggest that if, at the very least, contact the chairman of those standing committees and let them know that you're looking at that stuff and invite them to participate if they have an opportunity to do that. But I do think this is something that we need to move forward fairly expeditiously. So with that, I guess, how do we want to move forward then? Do we have a formal recommendation now to have the members of the House and the Senate JAC take their respective agencies, contact those chairmen of both the standing committees on the House and the Senate, and try to work those fees and get something back as a proposal? Do we still want a working group, or do we just want to bring that proposal straight back to the JAC in December? That's the part I'm not clear at, Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Yeah, I do think we want a working group that does a more comprehensive general look at it. I'd be happy to be part of it. So Larry, I would just suggest that you and the co-chair decide who you want to be on it, and we'll just report back to each other by the end of the week on who's going to do it, and we'll start just setting up some times for them.
Yeah, and that would be good. Give us a little time. I need to talk to Senator Perkins and get him up to speed on that. So with that, I guess we'll leave that as a unfinished item for right now, and hopefully have concise direction by the end of the week or first of next week. All right, with that, we're a little bit early on the agenda. Is there any more comment? Do we have any public comment? Karen, we did have public comment. Somebody was waiting on the CARES Act. I don't see them in the waiting room. Do we have any public comment on agency fee results survey? Either one of those I would open up right now for public comment, Karen.
Senator Hicks, no, we don't have anyone in the waiting room, and I haven't admitted anyone for public comment on those subjects.
All right, any other comments from the committee? Don?
Just a timing note. In order, if you want the agencies to also estimate the fiscal impact of the bill, at minimum, we'll need 3 weeks to do that after the bill is prepared. So we'll probably need to have pretty good direction in the next month month of November as to what the bill should entail so that we can proceed it through the process. Otherwise, you'll run out of time for the fiscal note, in which case you'll pass a bill which won't know what it's going to raise.
Well, we might be able to give them 3 months after that too. So anyway.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, typically a lot of the major agencies are listening in to this right now. And so, because I would just request that those agencies that are listening in, they're familiar with what their fees are and what they think may or may not be reasonable. So we would request for those folks that are listening in to please get back in touch with us. If you've got fees that are really just have, they've been the same thing since 1970 and it would make sense, tell us what they are. Tell us what it costs you to in terms of operation for whatever component, whatever that fee ties back to, and give us some recommendations so that we can make sounder decisions, because they can help us on this.
Yeah. All right, committee, anything else on this topic? We're a little ahead of schedule. That's good. We might actually get a little time for lunch. With that, I'm going to recess unless there's no other business before the committee. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. All right, we're recessed.